Putin calls the authority in Ukraine as Nazis, whereas who is behaving like a Nazi? Who is behaving like Hitler? Russia decides to put a nuclear bomb in Ukraine. No, I think it's not possible. I think with Russia also will perish with that. They would not go for that. The more power you have in your hand, you should speak like a wiser person, because potential of implying danger to the rest of the world is more when you have more power. This was what Putin always thought, that European Union would not take a very serious stand. They may be very careful because of the left is a small force, but it's scattered in the whole world. Their whole mindset is a little closer to Russia. Why? Because they still consider Russia as a continuation of the old Soviet Union. Because of political commitments, because of ideological positions, people want to take positions without thinking. Nationalism is good for some countries if it is understood in the term of liberty from a colony, for the authority of their colony. That is a collective fight for freedom, for its liberty. On the other side,
Hello everyone and welcome to the weekend meeting with Sanal Edamaruku. I am Shubhi Sinha, heading the youth for the Rationalist Internet. We have been conducting these Zoom conferences successfully for quite a few years, and we are happy to welcome you again to this meeting. Now, heightened fears of a military conflict between Russia and Ukraine have been present for some time, and eastern Ukraine has been the location of a proxy war between the two countries. So coming to the topic that we have today, which is Russian invasion of Ukraine, everybody knows about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine after Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in a televised address to his citizens in the early hours of Thursday morning. How long will this war continue? What does Russia exactly want? Is this the beginning of a new world war? There are too many questions in this chaos. And also, it is a very crucial thing to understand about, since it is about the future of all of us, and we should understand the situation carefully. So for a more insight towards the situation happening currently, we have Sanal Edamaruku with us. Welcome, sir.
So primarily, as we all know, we are on the verge of a great war. A great war in the sense that not because of the importance of this war, but because of the danger that it is posing to the entire world. Because there have been no war in the main Europe after the Second World War. There was no war where the superpowers were involved for a long time in this situation. And what will happen when a full-fledged country, a democratic country with a democratically elected government, simply is taken over by a neighboring country, which is a mighty power, which has a lot of arsenal, which has practically nuclear weapons that can burn down the whole of the earth several times, maybe several hundred times. Who would challenge such a force? There are forces that can challenge them. But if somebody challenges, would that be triggering of a new world war? That's the whole question now. And how can world tolerate such a move by a responsible government, which is one of the superpowers recognized by the United Nations, which is practically the prelude to a world government? That was how we all saw the United Nations in 1940s after the war. One of the superpowers, which has a veto power, goes on a war by just invading a neighboring country. Russia has a reason that it tries to explain to people. The Russian argument goes as follows. There was an agreement that Ukraine would not join the NATO forces. When, of course, Soviet Union was collapsing, that was one of those agreements that he says. On this other side, there was Warsaw Pact, which ceased to exist. And what will be the future of this Ukraine if they join or not join Warsaw Pact is something very important for Ukraine, because Ukraine has experienced another small annexure of a part of their country by Russia some years back. A small part of their country was simply annexed some years back. There will be no international serious response against that than some very strong statements by somebody or some public declarations, but nothing has happened. It has gone. What will happen if Ukraine is attacked or invaded or annexed into the main Russian Empire. Ukraine sought, naturally, the support of the European Union and the Western forces in case of such an eventuality. Which means what? You have to understand that in Europe, there are many countries which are not part of NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which guarantees that if any of the member countries is attacked, the united forces of the NATO will fight and defend that country. Finland is not a member of NATO, though it's part of European Union, part of the whole European civilization and tradition. It's not a member of the NATO. Russia has a serious threat. Occasionally, they are making threats occasionally that if Finland joins the NATO, that they would understand it as an aggression. What a statement. Simply because Finland shares, something like 1,300 kilometers border with Russia. There's a huge border with Russia and Finland. Similarly, there's a huge border between Ukraine and Russia on the other side. So if Ukraine joins NATO, Russia feels it cannot protect itself despite having the whole nuclear arsenal, despite having very powerful missile defense system. They're selling weapons all around the world. If any country is attacked by missiles, there are defensive mechanisms that Russia sells all around the world, which they have in their custody. And we do not know what is the actual strength of the arsenal that Russia has. There is no way of evaluating it. We have to guess only. There have been reports some months back onwards that there was a formation of army closer to Ukraine. Satellites were showing pictures about Russian army moving and making stations close by. There was no provocation. Russia was waiting for a provocation to attack Ukraine. But there was absolutely no provocation. They have been extremely careful because they were seriously interested in not getting into a war with mighty Russia. The president of Ukraine is a popular leader who was coming from the cinema practically. He was a very famous comedian and acted as the head of the nation, and people like him very much. And when he came to power, he has shown equally powerful and efficient and decent as a political leader. And people loved him. There were reports. Now we know that there's a war going on and the Russian army is on navy and the ground and the air force. They are attacking Ukraine. And what is their target? What's their objective? What's the mission of the war? Is not very clear. Do they want to annex the whole Ukraine into the fold of Russia? Or whether they want to liberate some part of Ukraine or divide the country and get one part at least in favor of Russia? Or do they want to overthrow the elected government and make a puppet government? These are the three options that we all are waiting to see what they are on to. Three possibilities. One, Russia totally invades and annexes this country. The second thing, they would divide the country and get one side, they would make a puppet government. And on the other side, they would leave it to the European Union to have a free government. And that will end up in dividing Ukraine. Possibility number two. The third possibility is perhaps overthrow the elected government and make a puppet government and claim that that's the new government. But are they going to achieve any of these? There was jokes all around that, Russia attacks and the whole European Union looks silent. No, in fact, they were not looking silent. On the second day, European Union very clearly declared its position and said that they would freeze all assets of Russia in the whole of Europe. And that would mean what? Russia has a lot of economic interest in Europe. Most of their fuel is sold in Europe. It's a mutual dependence, one can say. There are a lot of petrol stations that are run by the Russian companies in whole of Europe. Even if the governments would not stop it, people would reject to buy petrol from such stations. And Russian assets may not be very heavy or high in Europe, but also now we know that Britain has decided to freeze the accounts and America has decided to freeze the accounts. And now most of the world has decided that Russian flights cannot fly above them, which practically closes Russia to the entire world. Why would they take such a huge risk of practically getting the wrath of the whole world? Is there any other reason that the greediness of a political power to annex a very rich part of the erstwhile Soviet Union back into their fold, though the people do not want it, though there was an elected government, though they opted out of Soviet Union and reinstated their position very clearly that they would not want to be in the erstwhile Soviet Union, but they wanted to be an independent republic. It was their decision. So what would they want? What would they achieve? And what was the actual goal? Why would he want this? One of the possibilities would be totally different than what Putin would expect, or the possible consequences of the war, as we've seen, the three possibilities we have seen. But there is a third possibility that probably Putin would not have judged. Like America has got in a trap of Vietnam, a war that will never successfully won over. Perhaps Russia is going to be in a war trap in Ukraine. What Russia thought was, when they do it, since they have arsenal and nuclear weapons, well, there can be some protests, some sounds, but there may not be very big public opinion worldwide against it. It can handle it. Also, one of the wrong judgments that an erstwhile KGB chief, you have to understand that Putin was the chief of the secret service of Russia, of the Soviet Union, during the communist regime. And he became a politician and he emerged as the leader of the country, of a post-communist country. So his operations are practically with the whole knowledge of the mechanism of secret services and its secret operations. So his judgment perhaps is a wrong judgment about the Western world. He would think, in my opinion, my understanding, perhaps Putin judged the Western world very wrongly, because a former communist that he is, he would think that the West has only one interest, because it's capitalism. Therefore, they are only interested in their wealth, and it all runs for the capital. The classical capitalist societies are over. In most of the world, we have social democratic governments and welfare states. The classical definition that these people have sometimes get them into a kind of wrong understanding about the systems. Europe is more on its values than on its money. European Union perhaps is the most integrated international unit of different nations. And that's the neighbor of Russia. So his probably judgment was they have economic interests with Russia. There are trade relations with Russia. There are, economic interactions between Russia and the European Union countries. And therefore, when there is a war, they would go for their economic interests and forget about the people of Ukraine. That was the wrong judgment about the so-called capitalist countries from a former communist. Because Europe decided to reject the economic interests, stand for principle. They decided that they don't want any more business with Russia. Quickly, in one day, they decided. The European Union officially declared that they don't want any economic relation with Russia anymore, and sanctions were imposed. Now, a new effort is being done to stop Russia from the international monetary transactions. We all know that there is an international monetary transaction pattern that is universally accepted. And every single country in the international monetary system is part of that system. You can transfer money from one country to another if you accept certain codes and systems and you are allowed to be part of the international system. Russia was not, Soviet Union was not part of it, and the later Russia became part of that system. And now the next effort is to stop Russia from becoming a part of the international monetary system, which means nobody from any part of the world would be able to send any money to Russia. From Russia, you cannot send any money outside, and there will be a closed economy, which will be absolutely worthless for its international trade. One of the strongest actions that modern history has seen. After Second World War, this kind of powerful economic sanctions were not imposed upon any country by the entire world together. This shows that the European Union or the Western world has not decided to sit idle and watch what is happening in Ukraine. This is something, again, this was a wrong judgment of Putin. Putin made a mistake very clearly. The mistake was, of course, he wanted Ukraine for some reason. I will come to that. There is an internal compulsion that Putin was forced to do this. That is why he has gone for this. That is something I would come in the next part of this session. The primary objective of invading, if that is to control the nuclear power center there, for example, one of the arguments goes in that direction. That's a crucial interest. A lot of Soviet arsenal, nuclear weapons are in Ukraine. The Chernobyl leak, you may be remembering, the Chernobyl is in Ukraine. Now, Chernobyl is in control of the Russian army. And the workers there are practically in a kind of an imprisonment. The potential danger is very, very high. If there is a leak there, if there is a mistake in Chernobyl, that can be disastrous, not only for the Europe, but also for Russia. There will be radiation all around. And what would it mean? During Soviet times, what happened in Chernobyl was easy to be hidden. And the public information systems were completely blocked, and the world knew about it by evaluating the presence of radiation only. There was no authentic reports coming from Chernobyl. But we know that it can be very disastrous. And what will happen if there is radiation? There are two different ways to handle it. If people are not perishing, you will have a lot of impact because of the radiation. And there is no medicine that can stop the impact of radiation. But you can protect yourself by taking, for example, iodine, by preventing the damage it can cause to the body. That is one of the ways of the protection that you have to do when there is radiation. You have to eat iodine. And iodine is out of stock now everywhere. Even in Finnish stores, iodine is out of stock because everybody is afraid of a nuclear radiation coming very soon. Things are not that easy as it is seen in far-off lands. There is a shadow of war, a shadow of radiation, a shadow of nuclear war coming up any moment, which practically would lead to a third world war, which can be disastrous for the whole world. Why would Putin take such a risk? Perhaps he would not achieve any of the three goals that we discussed. He may not be able to defeat Ukraine completely. Why? Very simple. One of the judgments that Putin had, was that Ukraine did not have enough weaponry, enough arsenal. So how would they defend? They're not yet members of NATO. There was discussions going on to join NATO, but they were not yet members of NATO. So officially, NATO cannot come and defend Ukraine. Who would give them weapons? France. Well, will France give them weapons? Germany has never given weapons after the war to any other country. They have weapons. Who would give them weapons? Surprisingly, the whole scenario changes. Germany decides to send several anti-missile tanks. The whole set of flights are going from Germany to Ukraine to fight the Russian army. German arsenals are going there. Even Finland is sending. It has a huge stock of prepared material for any eventuality. And out of the huge stock that Finland has, it has now passed over to Germany, and which is also going to Ukraine. So, France has decided to send weapons to Ukraine, which means the whole of Western Europe is giving weapons and money, and they're pouring in money to Ukraine to buy weapons and fight and keep the people surviving. And there were reports in the beginning that the president of Ukraine has simply left and said that, okay, we surrender. No, that's not true. The political leadership of Ukraine stood sternly with the president, and he has come very openly telling that, well, we would fight. We would fight and see to it that we protect our people and we protect our children and we protect our nation till the last man falls die. That's a strong statement. We heard a similar statement from Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. So what is waiting for Putin if he continues this war would be another Vietnam, where America practically shown to the world that they are not a real power that can decide things that happens in any other part of the world. The world has seen that America is not that powerful in Vietnam. American economy had a huge setback. Now on the border of Russia with Ukraine, if a war continues for a longer time, it would not end that easily because all the European Union countries and Britain and France and even United States would be sending weapons to Ukraine. Nobody is leaving them just for the fate. That was one of the fears. Look, none of them are helping you. We are coming, and that was a lesson. Like it happened in Afghanistan. Many people thought that. Afghanistan, we all know that when USA left, they took away those people who worked with them. But the Chinese weapons suddenly went to support via Pakistan to the extremists. With the newfound weaponry in their hand, it was very easy for the Taliban to get the power. It was Chinese weapons. Also, we know that some weeks before the American declaration of leaving, before the final date of leaving, there was a meeting of the Taliban leaders with the Chinese authorities. China wanted only one guarantee, that there shall not be any launching part, aiming at China for any kind of missiles from Afghanistan. That was guaranteed. It was only after that China has given a lot of weapons to the Taliban leadership. And it was China's weapons that worked in Afghanistan. And there China had a special interest. Afghanistan was a playground of world powers for a long time. During the Cold War times, the United States at one side and USSR on the other side, having their geopolitical and strategic interests in Afghanistan, tried to control this place. Soviet Union had a very serious interest because during the winter, all their ports would be frozen. They had no freshwater ports during the winter. So they would always want something closer to where is the nearest possible port where ships can move during a winter. That is Karachi. So they would want, that is why political strategies always try to analyze that Soviet Union either would want control on a part of Pakistan by dismembering Pakistan. So the Baluch movement was supported. Many of the movements, Soviet Union was coming from north towards south, and they reached up to Afghanistan. They also thought that Iran would be in their control because there was a communist uprising there, which was taken away by the Islamic radicals. But that they didn't get. But Afghanistan, they had a control, and Najibullah was a Moscow-trained person, and he was the prime minister. So they were coming closer and closer. Many people would think that, Soviet Union was a friend of India, but how would they support China, Pakistan at that time? So it's something, many people would not understand. More than ideology, these are geopolitical, military, and strategic interests that are controlling the international situation. Many people would quote the example of India getting the Pillai steel plant by the Soviet Union. But also one has to remember that same time, the Karachi steel plant also was, given to Pakistan. It was almost on the same time. They were trying to make a balance. So the balance of power, the Datan has slightly tilted only when America moved towards China, thereby, forcing India to take a position closer to Russia. Was it a calculated move? There are many theories. Bimal Prasad, one of the experts on this period and area, who was a professor of Jawaharlal Nehru University in International Studies. He has a very detailed study about the whole subject. Bimal Prasad was India's ambassador in Nepal later, and he was my professor too. And the whole geopolitical, military, and strategic interests of United States and USSR found their conflicting point in Afghanistan. They could not come further south. China did not have a place there. China was not a player in that area. Now with the new Taliban coming with the Chinese weaponry, China is getting a new base there in this part of the world. That was China's interest. There was no ideology. There was no principle. In fact, what Putin thought about the Western world, that there won't be any ideology, there won't be any principle, there won't be any kind of fundamental values, but it will be capital that will be running them. That would be their understanding. Well, that was a mistake we have seen. Beyond capital, there was an interest of principles, and that has started working now. But in Afghanistan, What China went for was not principles, but not ideology, but pure interest of geopolitical influence and military influence and strategic control of the area. So this is something which many people would confuse and find it difficult to get along with, because sometimes countries would look like go for their national interest only. Because the fundamental principle of any foreign policy, as many of the experts would say, shall be guided by the national interest. Beyond the national interest, there is no other ideology behind foreign policy, is one school of thought. And many people have made jokes about Jawaharlal Nehru, who spoke about principles in international politics. He spoke about non-alignment. That was a different position. All the same, he was anti-imperial. He was not with Russia, and he found Russia also as an imperial force, the Soviet Union at that time, and America also as an imperial force. He tried to make another international unit, wherein he and Nasser and Tito were the central figures. The third world was represented by the non-aligned movement. Well, non-aligned movement had its sad end in New Delhi, during Indira Gandhi's time. The so-called non-aligned movement had its summit in Delhi, during Indira Gandhi's time, and wherein one saw Fidel Castro and all these kind of people who were in the Soviet camp coming, and India coming closer to Brezhnev and the then Soviet Union. That was the end of the non-aligned movement. It started with Jawaharlal Nehru and ended with Indira Gandhi. So that kind of a principled politics, international politics, which Nehru has taken forward. For example, during the Korean War, it was India that took a leading position and found an amicable solution after long negotiations. So India was a very powerful international player at that time, though we were a poor country. So that kind of a position was joked at by international experts earlier, because their argument always said that the international politics shall be guided only by the national interest. The national military interest, national geopolitical interest, national strategic interest, and national economic interest. No other principle shall be a guiding force, has been the idea of the pragmatists of the international politics. But, we didn't have great opportunities to show what was the role of India at that time, but what was the role of many countries that we have seen was they all have been mainly functioning with their national interest. It cannot be taken as a mistake. But when fundamental ideas are coming on challenge, would the nations look beyond the national interest and for principles? That is where what I was trying to say, that Putin made a mistake of judgment. The wrong judgment that he had was based on the idea that all these countries would go for their economic interest and their strategic positions. They don't want a conflict, and war will immediately bring down the economies and the international transactions will go down. Nobody wants to have another setback after Corona times. The pandemic is waning down, but nobody wants a big economic crisis coming out of war. It would not go beyond Ukraine. That was his thought. And the first reactions what we have seen was that, European Union does not do anything, America does not do anything, and Britain does not do anything. There is another major public opinion, which is even promoted by the Republicans, that US has a weak president, and therefore Putin got the courage to do it. That was one narrative that was in circulation. Forget about all these kind of things. Now what we see is a very promising position as against the situation in Ukraine. The world is reacting. Of course, the United Nations could not pass a resolution against that. Why? Russia is a superpower. One of the superpowers, if they veto any kind of resolution, it cannot be passed. So Russia has vetoed the resolution against it, so it cannot be passed. But European Union immediately decided to have sanctions. NATO officially now said that they would take a position if necessary, even though Ukraine is not a member. So what I imagine is that there will be a response to what happens in Ukraine. And that response would take some more time. First of all, they are trying to cut the veins of support, the monetary strength For example, the logistic support is based on how the money flows. So they are trying to strangulate Russia from different sides, primarily on the economic level, more on the international contact level, and thereby weakening its striking capacity, and then eventually getting on to Ukraine, not by entering into the war, but by giving more weapons and strength and support to Ukraine to fight back. Therefore, despite what many people expected, that either it will be invaded totally or controlled totally or divided, or they will make a puppet government, the other possibility that is coming is a long war wherein the world supports Ukraine and Russia finding it difficult to get control over this country. That is one major possibility. Well, that has again two other dangers. One danger is that will help Russia to control the internal crisis that is looming up in Russia. There is an internal issue in Russia. That is one of the reasons that Putin has used this opportunity to bring the whole attention outside. And he would have now enormous power that anybody who criticizes the government can be in prison now. Now the social media is stopped. Russia has stopped Twitter. Nobody in Russia can see Twitter. They cannot tweet, and they cannot see what is discussed on Twitter. Facebook is not available anymore in Russia. They are closing the world so that the Russian population does not understand what the world is speaking. So they would be hearing only what Putin would say and the official media would say. Same kind of situation during Stalin, where it was called an iron curtain around the Soviet Empire. Well, this is one major issue that Russia is facing. Russia has officially a democratic government. It has an election every 6 years, I think. Every 6 years, it has an election. So during this election, there was a major earlier provision when new Russia was emerging that no president can be a president more than 2 terms. Nobody would be able to become a president of Russia more than 2 times, like in United States. That was there in their constitution. So what would happen? Putin, as a person who controls the entire country, who was the president for 2 terms, after the second term, if he tries to change this law, by a chance, if this law fails to get approved, then what would happen? Then very easily, his authority will be challenged. So he decided to, there was a prime minister. In a presidential system, there is a prime minister. A prime minister is comparatively weaker position. Putin becomes the prime minister and makes the former prime minister as the president. Well, many people predicted at that time, that's a dangerous game. Now the whole power is with the new guy, and he could use that power against Putin and overthrow him, and he could gain the whole control. That was one fear that many people in Russia who were in the Putin camp were expressing. Putin knew how the control goes. Without having the position of the supreme commander of the army, he remained as a prime minister, still controlled the whole country with a puppet president. After one term, two times consecutively, he can become president. The third time, he cannot become president. Then after the right time, he steps down and Putin contests again and he becomes president. Well, the expectations were wrong, that he knew how to control a government without remaining as the head of the government. He still controlled the government as a prime minister, not as a president. And then got to see to it that, this guy becomes prime minister again and he becomes president. Then again, 2 terms come. The term is coming to an end. Now he changed the constitution. One can contest eternally. He would remain for a long time, very, very long time. He's still in his 60s, and one can expect that if nothing happens very dramatically, he can be there in power for another quarter century. So what would it mean? Will there be any challenge from within Russia? There was a challenge from within Russia. There is an opposition leader emerging in Russia. You all know this case. The opposition leader was arrested for making some statements that was offensive to the government. While he was taken in an aeroplane, well, he got some special problems. The classical Russian problem, which opponents would normally face, or the critic journalists would face in London or other places, he got in some health trouble. And finally, it was found that he was radiated. Kind of plutonium-based poison was administered on him. And he was taken to Germany, and it was identified very clearly that it was administered on him. And he was saved and sent back to Russia to lead the opposition. Of course, the moment he comes in, he's arrested. He's in jail. There's a growing support to the opposition leader in Russia. And this is something. And last, if you remember, Time magazine. I think I have a copy of the Time magazine here. Time magazine I have it here. Time magazine in the last issue is Alexei Navalny. That's the leader of the opposition in Russia. He is in the imprisoned dissident. And the title of the heading of Time magazine is The Man Putin Fears. The problem is this gentleman, Alexei Navalny, he was in jail and he was poisoned. He was taken to Germany. There is inquiries going on worldwide. There are big international opinion going on. There is action going on internationally for poisoning the opposition leader. And he is back in Russia. And his popularity is growing so wide, so fast. That is one of the reasons that Putin wanted to bring the attention of the nation totally to a different thing, which would bring the pride of the Russians back to the old, imagined glory of the Soviet Union. To counter Navalny, to ensure that his power remains longer, Putin wanted to do something. And precisely that was the reason, that was the internal compulsion that was guiding him forward. Now, of course, as you know, that Putin got a new constitutional provision wherein he can contest endless of times. And of course, he doesn't want any opposition leader emerging. And if anybody contests against him as president, of course, they will be poisoned or killed or eliminated. But this guy is challenging because he is now getting the support of the whole world. The whole world media is focusing on him. And so that has to be stopped. So Putin has to continue in power at whatever cost, whatever is the consequence. Putin perhaps would want, this is the first question we have asked, what would be the goal of Putin? We do not know. This is a kind of despotic act, like a great aggressor. Who can be compared with Putin's behavior now? Maybe Stalin you can compare, or Hitler you can compare. There is no other comparison in the contemporary history, like what he has done now. You can find such despots in Africa, but not in Europe anywhere. After Second World War, we haven't seen anything of this sort in Europe. But how would he do it? Why would he do it? What did he want? The first three questions we raised, the possibilities that either he wanted to capture this country, because it's a very rich country. It has nuclear plants, a lot of nuclear arsenal there. Chernobyl plant is there. So he wants this country. He wants to annex it. Option number one. Option number two, he wants to divide it, to make a buffer state, to cut it off from the rest of the difficult part of the world, want to have a buffer puppet state in between and divide the country into two and make his own supporting government at one side and leaving the rest of the part with European Union. Possibility number two. Possibility number three, he wanted to overthrow the government and make a puppet government there. If one of these three were the immediate objectives that he had, that's not going to happen anyway. Either he had a wrong judgment and he thought it to be easy. It's not that easy that we have seen that the whole world is supporting now Ukraine. But a fourth possibility that he wants, some experts would analyze as follows. He didn't want to win the war. He didn't want to capture it. He didn't want to divide the country. He didn't want to immediately make a puppet government. Any of this would be interesting for him. But more on that, he would want a prolonged war there. What would be the interesting thing for a prolonged war? A prolonged war will keep the army active and alert. Russia has one of the biggest armies in the world. So the army is active. The weaponry is used, and it will have more military acumen when it is on a war. So the Vietnam, the long war, an unending long war for years and decades to come, it would be perhaps what he indirectly wanted, is what some experts would analyze, because he would want at least till the next elections of Russia. In a national situation where all the countries are cornering Russia, well, he could now stop Twitter, he could now stop Facebook, any other social media. WhatsApp already was not there in Russia. So Russia would have its own GPS system. It would have its own social media system. It will have its own economic structure without any connection to the world. So the world cannot influence this closed world. In a way, that's a protective measure also. One would think that, the people may suffer and the quality of life would go down, and there can be many problems. Yes, but who would care? A despot would need not care about these kind of things. He would want this to remain as a closed world where the Western media is not coming there, Western television is not reaching there, no communication. It's a closed world. Another North Korea in a big frame. If that is what he wants till the next election and to make the country fully in his control for next decades, well, that's a goal he may achieve if he's not overthrown. One of the possibilities is that, what he sees, that's the fourth possibility that we have discussed, that he actually wanted this with a very clear vested interest of remaining on power because of internal compulsions. The worldwide interest that's shown, for example, Time magazine presenting Alexei Navalny as the big challenger of Putin, he would have smelled or got the heat of the international interest in his political opponents. He doesn't want it. If he could remain in power by changing a constitution, he would want to go to any extent to remain in power. So very clearly, so he wants to remain in power, that's very clear. And very clearly, the war was an aggression. There is no doubt about that. Russia has declared the war. They were looking for an opportunity, a pretext to get Ukraine provoked and then wanted to say that they have started it and we responded to it. No, they could not get it done. Now it's a very clear declaration of war by Russia for no reason, officially not explainable. The only reason that they officially said earlier was, well, if Ukraine joined NATO, our security will be in danger because at our border there is a country in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's a military treaty. Well, still the NATO would enter into a country's affairs or coming in protection of a country only when that country is attacked. If Russia did not have a plan to attack Ukraine, NATO's interference is not possible. So that's an imaginary idea. But if you remember the speech of Putin 3 days back, day before yesterday, he made a public speech, which was aired in all world languages. It was originally in Russian, but simultaneously it was available in English, Spanish, and French, the major languages. And it says a different language. It was no more speaking about NATO as a threat. That is what he originally claimed as a threat. Now the new speech, he says that Ukraine is a product of former Soviet Union. We made it and it's our country. That's the tone he uses. He invokes certain very interesting terms. Classically, people who want to brand their enemy would find it very easy to call them Nazis or fascists. So Putin calls the authority in Ukraine as Nazis, whereas who is behaving like a Nazi? Who is behaving like Hitler? It's very clearly Putin. But he calls them Nazis and fascists, number one. Number two, he says that, the country of Ukraine was nowhere existing as a big entity. It was all Soviet Union that gave money and support and all, and we built up this country. Well, Soviet Union had a very tricky position at the beginning. They said that they are a union with autonomous rule in different countries. Free nationalities are existing. Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Belarus, all these independent nationalities are joining together as a big union and become the Soviet Union, USSR. Unlike USA, where they are a part of the integral part of a central government, a federal government, in USSR, the theoretical framework is that they were all independent nationalities, but they all are in one union only. But from this union, for example, Shevardnadze, who was later the president of Georgia, was the foreign minister of Soviet Union. Again, Stalin came not from Russia, but from Georgia. And Lenin himself was in Ukraine for a long time, during the building up of the war. Later, of course, he has gone out of the country and he lived in many countries, in Switzerland, in Finland. In Finland, he was living for several years, to be away from the warring situation, and he wanted to control the conflicting revolution sitting from outside. When Trotsky was in Switzerland, they all were living outside and leading the revolution there. So the claim of Putin is very simple, that we built up. They were not existing as a big power, and we built up. The Bolsheviks built Ukraine. Well, he claims the heritage of the Bolsheviks now. Who are Bolsheviks? The people who came to power after the October Revolution in 1917 under the leadership of Lenin. Bolsheviks means minorities, Mensheviks means majority, and the minorities, the first, there was one revolution, and the minority group overthrew the government, and they got the Russian authority, fully under the control of the Communist Party. So the Bolsheviks actually built up Ukraine. So they could not preserve it, and therefore it has gone away, but historically it's ours. That's what he says, which means that the original idea of the Soviet Union, that these are nationalities independently, but voluntarily they become part of the Union. Now he says that, well, they made it, therefore it was part of us. Now historically it was part of us. It's a claim on a country, showing some part of the past history. It would be something like if at a historic time, if one good example would be South Asia. During British Empire or British colonization, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all were part of one government. If India one day say that we were part of one government, and that has been separated, but we want to capture Bangladesh. In fact, Bangladesh was not existing. We have made it because we support, and our army has moved in there, and that is why Bangladesh is existing. Therefore, we have an authority of Bangladesh, and we capture it. Therefore, if India claims like that, how absurd it would be. It was the same argument that Putin is now making about Ukraine, a historical argument for the claim of the authority over the country. So NATO is no more an issue. NATO was a pretext. He had an intention to capture this place pretty long back, and there was a narrative made for that. Another argument, during the Tsarist, Russia is a long tradition. There's a huge history behind the Russia. The Russian Empire was so big, and this area was part of the Russian Empire. Therefore, it's part of Russia. That is the second argument. Look, this is what Putin has been speaking 2 days back after the declaration of the war. He was making a claim of history over these people. He was making a claim from the recent history, asking that the world to accept it because this was part of us. It has gone away for some time. Now we get it back. So simple like that. A kind of a moral argument which would encourage the pride of the people in Russia. Those people who are supporting him. He has a huge support in Russia. Of course, if you don't support him, you will not survive. That's another thing. But he still has a huge support in Russia. A lot of people are afraid of him. A lot of people are respecting him. A lot of people are hating him, but they are silent. Like any other despot, like any other dictator, the so-called elected leader is controlling the whole country at his whims and fancies. So what is the solution? Can any international force attack Russia? Well, that's not a possibility at all because there is no world war now. There is no question of Russia. There is no war against Russia. The war is between Russia and Ukraine. What the world can now do is get the people safe there, and they will fight and there'll be huge miseries waiting for. You know how many people have left the country already? Almost 120,000 people have left in the first 3 days out of Ukraine. They were coming to the borders of Poland. They are going to the borders of other countries, and they're trying to escape from this country. Europe has seen huge crisis of migrants coming from other parts of the world, from Syria and other parts of the world. Now there'll be a new set of migrants coming to the main Europe, coming from Belarus. And it's not from Belarus, but from Ukraine. So Belarus would not, another neighbor, would not take these people. So they all are trying to move into Poland to the main Europe, and Poland would try to stop them because they cannot hold all these people. Poland is comparatively a poorer country, though it's a big economy in Europe. The size of the economy is very big, but the living standards are not that big in Poland. But from Poland, they will all creep into other parts of Europe. So that there can be much, much more people coming from Ukraine to other parts of the world. That is one thing. And the human misery is enormous. Majority of the people are in bunkers. In most of these countries, we have huge bunkers down, which are used as underground car parking now. Many countries, in Sweden, we have that. In Finland, we have. For example, in Helsinki city, almost, there's a parallel city underworld. There are huge parking grounds. You have to go something like half a kilometer down to reach the parking place. And then from there, you can go to any part of the city, any parking ground. Similarly, at different parts of the city, these all are underground connected. But these were all constructed in a way that it would protect people from any kind of bombing, even from a nuclear bombing. That's how these were all constructed. So this is a huge protection shield in many countries. That is available in Ukraine also. So people are down there in the metro area or in underground parkings. And life is going on there. Food is coming to a shortage there. Because I've heard reports that some people were telling that they have food store only for one more day. There's been new supplies coming down. So there is bombing going on. There is buildings are smashed and people are killed and civilian areas are attacked. And it's like a kind of a wild war, like American carpet bombing in Syria. Or similar things have happened, like in Vietnam, what America has done. The same thing is happening now in Ukraine. Destinations are attacked. Chernobyl is, the nuclear plant is in control. And there are many strategic places are in the control and the fight is going on. Kyiv is almost under control and many other cities are under siege and the fight is going on. So if this goes in a controlled area for a longer time, that will be misery for Ukraine and opportunity for Putin to control his own country showing this war and close the country from the rest of the world. That is one thing which is very important because many of the rich Russians are leaving the country. There are many people who could afford to have a good life. If they can afford, they leave. They go to London. The new housing blocks coming in London and the big houses and bungalows in London are all purchased by Russians coming out from Russia. But not only in London. You go to Sweden, you go to Germany, you go come to Finland. Everywhere Russians are coming. Russians who are not happy with their system, who have enough money, they would leave the country. The nearest country is Finland. In Finland, there is a huge Russian population who are not friendly to Russia, but they're friendly to Finland because they found Finland a better place than Russia. The danger, also you have to imagine that, the pattern that Russia is following now has a history also. There is a similar conflict with Finland. So that is why there is a serious alert and stress in Finland. The Finnish politicians are speaking very wise language. I'm very happy about the way they are speaking. They're speaking very strict language and very careful language, and they're part of European Union, but they are not part of NATO. But this will reopen the idea that Finland would join NATO. That's number one that I understood. And Finland is ready to sacrifice all the trade with Russia because it's part of a principled international politics. And the Finnish leaders have been trying to find a diplomatic solution when the warmongering was coming up. They were trying to talk to people and they were trying to take initiative. This is what perhaps the world leaders should do. This is what I've been speaking yesterday on. I was speaking on some television about this same crisis. This is one thing I was suggesting that the Indian Prime Minister, for example, India is one of the biggest democracies. India has a huge trade relationship with Russia, and India is still buying a lot of oil from Russia, and India is exporting wheat to Russia. So there's a huge trade connection between Russia and India. Therefore, India has a persuasive power over Russia. Perhaps this is an opportunity for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. If he really imagines him as a global leader in shaping up, this is an opportunity for him to talk to Putin and use his persuasive power to get him go back from the war. If that can be done by a political leader who is still friendly with Russia, because, of course, India is talking with Russia, and a lot of people who were students, 18,000 students were there. Indian students were studying in Ukraine. Now they are all taken back to India. None of them are, having big trouble. I think, there was flights and flights taking these students back to India. There are communication channels open with India. Therefore, perhaps India is one country which has not taken a very hostile position to Russia, but still unhappy about the whole situation, could talk to Putin and take an initiative, thereby India re-emerging on the international scene as a big player. This is a possibility. This is an opportunity that India has. Perhaps India should do. One possibility. The other possibility is the Finnish leadership. They have a very close relation with Russia for a long time. If you remember, when Putin and Trump, the presidents of the two superpowers, met first time, they met at the home of the Finnish president. So Finland has such a dignified position. So perhaps the Finnish leaders should, talk to Putin. Of course, the President Niinisto of Finland has been talking to Putin some days before the crisis, is what I heard. So this kind of efforts internationally by head of nations should take the initiative on one side. If we can end the war the earliest, if we can convince Putin that this is not going to work the way he expected, that would be the best. That would be the best. If one can convince and, giving him an opportunity to withdraw back from this war scene, a decent exit route is provided to him. And if he could go back and end this war, that would save so many lives and a big conflict which can eventually lead to a global crisis. So what is the possibility? The possibilities are limited. Putin expected that he would have a walkover. Ukraine is no more happening. If one of the three options that we considered, which is also seen by experts on this scene, that capturing the whole country and making a puppet government, or dividing the country and make his own part as a puppet government, or annexing the whole of Ukraine into part of Russia. These are what is his goal? We do not know. But we would imagine a third goal, that he wants to keep the war prolonged for a long time so that he can control his own country till the next election, and the opponent is silenced and nobody would be daring to support an opponent against Putin when there is a war, and the whole social media is now stopped. No media is openly speaking anything. The whole system is in full control. A war is an opportunity for any kind of a despotic leader to get things in control, to get the opposition in complete control and get the media in full control. So if that is what he wants, he would prolong it till the next election. But if not, even if that is the plan, that can be disaster. That can perhaps end the regime of Putin, is what he should understand. If there is international sanctions coming the way it is now planned, that would strangulate Russia economically. And that would be enormous misery within Russia for the people living there. That can easily build up political unrest, despite his hopes of building up a kind of a total suppression regime over the people. So if reason prevails in the mind of Putin, he should simply withdraw from this scene and end the war and make a dignified return back. And who would take the initiative? That's where one of the world leaders to emerge now, to speak to Putin and give him a sense of reason in his mindset. Who can do that? Who can do that? Perhaps that is why I feel that perhaps India is the country that could take the initiative and try to convince Putin to come to reason. Well, that's an effort which can fail, which can work. In any case, what I feel with a very serious concern is that we have a war, which may be a prolonged war. And if it continues for a long time, and if countries get fed up and try to interfere, which can turn into the Third World War. That's the potential danger. That's the looming danger in front of us. And that's what we have to be very seriously concerned about. And that's going to be a disaster to the whole world. Therefore, we have to find ways to end the war. We have to find strategic ways to end the war. So that's who will do it and who can initiate it and how will it go forward. We will again, in the coming weeks, if necessary, discuss the same topic from different angles and perspectives, including bringing in, people who worked as diplomats in Russia as well as in Ukraine, would be also invited for this discussion. We'll keep on discussing, but at this moment, don't underestimate the whole situation. Don't make simplistic solutions and simplistic jokes about the whole thing. It's something very, very serious beyond our imagination. It can be very dangerous to the entire populace of the whole world. It can be the beginning of the third world. Let's hope it should not and it will not go to that direction. They will find its own natural end pretty soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanal sir. I have a question. Actually, I think the last presentation, Putin he made an anti-communist statements in his last speech. I think it is for the internal audience, not for the international media. Am I right, sir?
Is that the question? Or a question is coming only?
Yes. I doubt it.
Yeah. It can be internally and externally also, Madhu. Why? Because internally, communist parties are not a big threat to him inside. There are no powerful communist party anymore existing in Russia. That's an old generation, about 70 years. Very few people only. Most of the old communists became part of the new system. There is a communist party which would not get more than 10% of votes in any election. And he would keep that communist party to show as a symbol of something that would fail repeatedly. And he would like to see that communist party is the opposition. That's easy for him because people are fed up with communist parties. No younger person would. I've gone to Russia many times. I mean, after the Soviet collapse, many times. And I know how people are speaking. I have close friends in Russia who have been attending our conferences also. I know how people are speaking. People are thinking with fear about the communist regime. All new generation are afraid of it. Now they felt they have freedom, but now this is again, the Stalinist mode of rule is coming now. But communist parties as the major opposition is an easy thing for him. But what he said was not denouncing the communist parties. There was only one sentence in that whole statement. What he said is that the communists failed to keep the union. That's what he said. That's a major criticism about Gorbachev that the present-day communists also would be speaking. But on that point, he was actually targeting the left in the whole world. The left is a small force, but it's scattered in the whole world. Their whole mindset is a little closer to Russia. Why? Because they still consider Russia as a continuation of the old Soviet Union. No matter whether it's a purely capitalist society, for them, it's the old Soviet Union's continuation. So he's targeting them. When he says that this was made by Bolsheviks and by Lenin, he's actually trying to win the left in the world. That is one thing. And within the country, of course, one small set of people would feel that the old glory of Soviet Union should be brought back. They don't want the communist regime, but the glory of the Tsarist empire, that was bigger than the communist rule. The Tsarist empire was so big and it touched the whole part of this area. Finland was part of, for example, the Tsarist empire. I mean, Finland had to fight for its freedom from Russia. So that was in 1917 when the Russian Revolution was successful that Finland got its independence. Reason was very simple. Lenin was hiding. I mean, he was not in Russia. He was hiding in Helsinki city in Finland. And he had a promise to keep the independence of Finland. And Finland was not part of the Soviet Union. It was independent. It was a decision of the people. But in 1939, after Lenin's period, during Stalin, remember that's a very important stage. I mean, Russia under Stalin, under the communist regime, decided to capture Finland, 1939, during the Second World War. So they decided they will get a walkover over Finland. Like they thought now Russia thinks about Ukraine, they decided to simply capture Finland. Finland is, I mean, comparatively a smaller country as compared to Soviet Union. They thought it's a a small country with the weapon powers also. But Finland had ferocious fighters. It's a legend here. It's known as the White War. And how people fought is when people of the old generation, if you ask Finns, they would be crying with the pride about that war. The Soviet army, they were coming on horses and all. The Finn soldiers buried themselves in snow. And when the army came, imagine they buried themselves for resistance for hours or days till the Soviet army came. And they raised up and attacked the horse army, which was coming. And it was a great fight. And they made, there was bombing over Helsinki, but they manipulated that it was seen that they have off the light of the whole city and made all the boats in the waters, they made as a city by, a view from the sky, and they made a wrong bombing. But at the end of it, the war was Soviet Union failed to small Finland. They lost the war. So Germany tried to attack Russia, Soviet Union or Russia earlier, or even Napoleon tried to attack Russia. All of these countries failed. But when Russia attacked a tiny Finland, Russia failed. So Soviet Union failed and went back. And several generals who led the fight were shot dead by Stalin's authorities at that time because of the humiliating failure from Finland. So Finland is always celebrating that great victory against Russia-Soviet attack at that time. So despite that, there's a trade relationship and friendly relationship going on. But now in Belarus, if they have the same fate, like a quick failure is not expected. There can be long, prolonged fight, and there can be a fight. But this question that you said, that was it for the people outside or for inside, that he was invoking the idea of the Bolshevik revolution and the old Russia, is still can be countered on both ways. It can be for the outer people, targeting the urban left in the Western countries, or it can be for keeping the other opposition down and maybe promoting the weaker communist parties. Yes, both are possible, but that has no practical meaning. It's only a tactical impact it has. Even the Indian Communist Party, Marxist, did not buy this idea. If you see their official communique 2 days back, they are proposing to cease the hostilities. So they didn't buy this idea. So it was, in that case, it would be going, as per you suggested, that it was for the internal situation, not externally. And if it was externally, it failed. The other communist parties are not buying this, slogan. Thank you.
So on this note, I think we're moving to the question answer section. There's something lag with my clubhouse. Yeah. So if anybody has a question, so I think Sakti wanted to say something. I would just unmute her and you can proceed with your question or whatever you want.
Before Sakti coming to speak, I would introduce her. Sakti is my daughter who lives in New Delhi, and she is very active in the Rationalist movement, and she is of digital diplomacy of one of the major missions in Delhi. Yes, Sakti, please.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. You made a very interesting point about the war, that the war is on Ukraine, but nobody has waged war on Russia yet. The West is condemning the war. India is in a position of influence, of persuasion, but there is no war on Russia yet. It is a war on Ukraine. Do you think India will change its stance where it has, Jayashankar recently made a statement that China is more dangerous than Russia, and India does not seem to be actively involved in condemning this, maybe because of the trade links, or maybe because of the fact that we have bought weapons from Russia. Do you think the stance of India might change in recent future?
One of the things that I see that India has not taken a very clear position. For example, during the United Nations voting, India has abstained along with China. That's an interesting thing. India should not have abstained. Well, maybe that's a clever move in a way, because now when India abstains, India has not taken a negative position against Russia at this moment. It still has a door of dialogue possibility open with that. For India, strategically, if one takes the geopolitical interest and military interest and strategic interest, China is more a threat to India than Russia. That's very clear. Because we have common borders with China and we have an old war with China, and China has been supporting Afghanistan and partially the radical groups in Pakistan. Therefore, China is a threat to India, strategically, military, and geopolitically. But Russia is not one. But in that case, India would find Russia a friendly country, and Russia will also find India an ally of convenience. In that situation, India will have a persuading power. That's more important. India cannot wage a war. India should not also go for a war in this situation. And India has no border with Russia. And there is no possibility of an airstrike on Russia or anything. I mean, that's unnecessary, and one should not escalate the war. And I don't think India's tradition is not entering into a war like that. But the persuasion possibility of India is very, very important. India's foreign minister is a very, very articulate person. Dr. Jaishankar is a very articulate person. He comes from such a tradition also. His father himself was a famous diplomat. And he was heading the Indian Institute of Strategic Studies, Dr. Subramaniam. And so he would advise, in my view, a person of his stature could advise the present Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to take a leading role to persuade Russia to withdraw from this adventure. If that is what you meant, yes, that's a possibility and that should be done.
Yes, now I think we can move to one question from Clubhouse.
I have a question for Sanal actually. Now, if you support Putin like most in Clubhouse, like if you support and talk about it, people stamp you as a fanboy. Actually, I have a different opinion actually, about Putin because I have been following Putin for past long years actually, and I have seen his interviews with his annual press interviews. He conducts annual press interviews every year, and there has been a lot of interviews with him, with a lot of channels, and like Megyn Kelly had an interview with him. And for past few years, like 10 years, more than 10 years, I've been following Putin, his politics and his, stance. But if you see, this is, but most of the people in Clubhouse or most people, they see Putin from few weeks. They have the picture of Putin from few weeks back, like after Ukraine was started. But they have not seen Putin talking about NATO, their expansion, and the threat for the sovereign nature of Russia, long before what he has said to this Western countries, what he has pleaded to the Western countries, and what he has been trying to say when Obama was in power in 2 terms, and when Trump was there. Trump was very good because Trump is a non-political type of character. Like he don't do Yeah, no, I can frame it as a question, but without saying this, I cannot frame it as a question because it's a little bit long. So I want to say, this hypocrisy of Western media and Western countries, I'm seeing it like that. US can intervene in Iraq. They can wage a war, saying you have chemical weapons. You can intervene in Vietnam. You can intervene in Libya. You can intervene in any country in the world. But if Russia intervenes because of because NATO is expanding and NATO is sitting there, placing their missile batteries all over the border of Russia. And if you say a strategic country like Ukraine is overwhelmingly they want to join this one, NATO, then what is the issue actually? That Putin has a right to defend that. That's my opinion.
Okay. Now the whole idea goes as the West you consider as a uniform entity, as one unicorn with one horn. It's not like that. For example, Vietnam War, when America got entrapped into the Vietnam War, no other Western country has gone to support it. In fact, in the universities of Western countries have been the playgrounds against the Vietnam War. Bertrand Russell from London has been the major campaigner against the Vietnam War. The American universities, students came out and academicians came out and the media came out against what has been done in Vietnam War. So it was a misadventure of United States, which was, West is a place where people can say opinions. You won't be put in jail there. You can criticize things. That's the whole difference. In closed societies, you don't have that opportunity. So you cannot compare the West with a closed society. Now Putin does not have a closed society does not mean that it's a communist society or communist party rule society. It can be anything. It can be Uganda's Idi Amin's rule. It can be Putin's rule. These are not communist regimes, but other regimes also can be of the same nature. But here, what Putin, the argument that you say is that he has a right to defend himself, right? If anybody comes within his country's borders, he has a right to defend himself. Ukraine is an autonomous, independent country. And why should he bother if Ukraine feels that it should be in an alliance internationally? Would Ukraine say that Russia should not take this position, Russia should not take that position, it should not have nuclear arsenal? If Ukraine says, will Russia care about it? Well, because they are a mighty political power, since they have a lot of arsenal, they have a different standard and the other people have a different standard. Would that mean that? In fact, the primary idea that every single nation has its own sovereignty is the key of the international balance of power. Every single country, whatever size it has its own sovereignty. It can decide for itself. Its future is to be decided by that country. No neighboring country, however big it is, however powerful it is, it has no say on the politics of that country. If you take that logic, in India, for example, Nepal is a small neighboring country. If Nepal enter into an agreement with China, will India capture Nepal? Will that be justified? In fact, Nepal has entered into an agreement with China. Will that give us legitimacy to attack and capture or annex Nepal? Bangladesh has very close ties with countries that are not friendly to us. Pakistan, for example, is supporting militant groups who are coming to India. Will that give a legitimate ground for us to capture Pakistan? World does not work like that, and international relations don't work like that. No country has the right to challenge the sovereignty of another country. No country, however big it is. No, it has no power. So if that is like that, only the mighty would remain in the world. All other countries would be suppressed. Well, nobody would support the Iraq war. But what happens is, when Iraq was attacked with a pretext that it had chemical weapons, I mean, many people criticized all around the world. But also you have to understand that in the United States, the next presidents came and with facts, they declared, Obama said himself that that was a mistake. There was no chemical weapon. And that was wrong. That's possible in a democracy. That's not possible in a despotic regime. That's the whole difference. So nobody justifies what was happening in Iraq. There are so many unacceptable things happened in the world. There are so many irrational things happen in the different world, but that would not give justice. That would not give a reason of legitimacy to do again and again by the same thing. Where is the hypocrisy? The whole of European Union has agreed to the position that there was no chemical weapons. When United States has later corrected itself and said that it was a mistake, it was wrong, there was no chemical weapons. They said it. Where is the hypocrisy then? Even if there is hypocrisy by some countries, that would not, if somebody has hypocrisy, that would not give legitimization for my aggression to another country. This neighbor is hypocrite because in a previous conflict which I had with another person, they have taken a wrong position. Therefore, I have a legitimate right to attack my neighbor because they are wrong people. They are hypocrites. So therefore, I will attack the other guys and they would not interfere because they are hypocrites. Will that be a logic? Will things work like that? What is the justification? Now Putin is no more speaking about NATO. Look at his speech. He's not speaking. He says that beyond the issue of NATO, we have other reasons. And he spent 90% of his time to speak about other reasons why Ukraine should be part of Russia. Historic reasons. We built it up. Bolsheviks built it up. That's what he says. During Tsar's regime, it was part of us. And they had loans. What all reasons he said. When the country was, they have gone out of USSR, their debts, there was an option who should pay it. In fact, who took the international loans? The obligation came to Russia. And Russia paid it up over the years. And it was in 2017, the whole payment was made up. So we paid their loan. Therefore, we have a right. That's part of his speech. He's not speaking about NATO. So that is what people, the Putin boys in Clubhouse and other places, they are still, some days behind what Putin said. That was Putin's earlier argument. NATO would come to our neighbor and we don't like it, therefore we capture it. That was the earlier argument. And all those people who speak about that are not understanding what he spoke later. He doesn't speak about NATO anymore. He speaks about all historic connections. We built it up. Bolsheviks built it up. Lenin made it. Therefore, it's ours, is what he's telling. And also, if somebody is hypocrite, I mean, by taking your argument for argument's sake, that doesn't give you legitimacy to attack somebody else. Thank you.
I think let's take one question from Zoom now. We have Ratish KK with us.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Yes.
Actually, my question was asked by Shakti. Anyway, I add on to that. Even though our Ukraine Prime Minister called Modi, what is really our Prime Minister, it is from media news. But still, they have gone for any negotiation with or they have moved anything for a solution talk with Russia. It shows our incapability of our Indian leadership. So what is your take on that?
I do not know exactly what Indian leadership is officially doing now. I found a report yesterday in the Finnish media that the Finnish government has appreciated India's initiative. That is what I read in the Finnish media. What does it mean? India must maybe taking an initiative of negotiations. And India has the capacity to do that. And that's what I was proposing even yesterday, because this is not a question of show of power. It's a question of persuasion now. Because I would say that even at a war stage, there are possibilities of diplomatic solutions. And diplomatic solution, one has to understand that it's not just persuasion. Any kind of persuasion will work only when you have the power to do it. India has the power.
Okay, sir. But now, recent development, even Israel is going to have a mediation. This one or the Italian, it's going to mediate. So even Israel can do it. Why can't India? But nobody. What is the problem actually in their leadership?
I think Ratish, you didn't understand what I was trying to say. In fact, the reports say that India is taking some initiative already, is what I was trying to say. Why India is not taking is what you said. What I tried to explain was there are reports in European media that the initiative being taken by India is appreciated. That's what I was trying to explain. On the contrary, European media is reporting that India is taking initiative. It's not heard in India. That's one thing. I do not know what's the initiative. I would propose yesterday in my television interview on the same topic in Madhuribhumi channel, I've been proposing the same thing, that India has a possibility to take initiative because India has the power to do it, not as an economic power, but as a great trade partner of Russia. And we have historic ties with Russia for a long time. From 1970s, we have a long historic tie. Israel can take an initiative. Israel is not a small power. It's a mighty power in a way. And also it's important because the head of Ukraine is a person of Jewish origin. That's another point of interest of Israel on this point. Though he is not a Jewish practitioner, I mean, it's very clear that he's a non-believer by all sorts. I mean, he has made his position very clear. And more than 52% of the Ukraine population is a non-believing population. And I mean, so it's a very, very different society. So Israel can take an initiative, but more than Israel is not a big trade partner to Russia. But India is a huge trade partner, and India may have a better possibility. These all are efforts to be done when there are people quarreling, and who can come in and take an initiative to stop it, and whomsoever has the power. Others can get crushed in the whole process. Well, any country that has capacity should do it. Israel should do it. Well and fine. If India can do it, well and fine. Somehow this has to stop. Otherwise, this is going to be misery for all of us, everywhere in the world. I fully agree that every country should try in their best to try to find a solution.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ratish.
Thank you. Now from Prabhos, Shafiq, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I didn't listen fully of Sanal's speech. But during his speech, I feel that he is nullifying the presence of the ultra-nationalist movement over there. And my question is that there are a lot of things to be, you know that what happened in 2014 and 2018 as a movement, especially on the C14 far right wings group, the vigilantism of their activities and how the human rights, groups has condemned the then president, Petro. But you are not, giving any significance of that. That is a feel I felt from your talk. Don't you think that this Ukraine's, that revolution of dignity ultimately led to this war today? Don't you think that it does not have any impact on this? And also, America's role in displacing, that president in 2014, the president who was, not willing to sign that European partnership agreement. What is his name? Victor Ivanchik, right? Sorry, I didn't get his name. Okay. So at that time, US funded people. They made agitation in Ukraine. They wanted to displace this president, and finally, 2014, I think he fled to another country, right? So this is all made this war. This is my belief, and America has a big role in this, and this is the US actually led this Ukraine into war, and it is an inevitable position for as far as Putin is concerned, that he has to take the control. I mean, for breaching the contract, they made it in 1991 that these buffer countries, the so-called buffer countries, should not, join with the NATO forces. I think this is a violation or breaching of the contract they had proposed by Mikhail Gorbachev. So my question is that, again, the revolution of dignity and America's role ultimately played in this war. So what is your comment on this?
Now, this is a problem. You haven't heard what I spoke. So you are commenting after hearing only a part of it, right? So therefore, you would put blame on me for something that you did not hear, number one.
No, I said sorry, I did not listen to you fully.
Yeah. So you wanted to make a point that, well, anyway, it must be US imperialism. That's a classical position. In India, when the Mahabharata story is narrated like this, if Kichaka is dead, it could be Bhima only. There's a very famous sentence like that. Similarly, if anything happened anywhere, it must be America, because America is the whole player of the whole world. And so anything anywhere in the world, we have to blame. There is a ready-made, position that we can accuse. That's America. Okay. Now, anyway, unfortunately for everybody who understands the whole scene, even Russia would not say that. And you have gone one step ahead of Putin, and which even Putin did not accuse, is what you are accusing. So he did not dare to accuse this level. It must be coming from still radical position than Putin. So Putin, unfortunately for you, did not take this position. He didn't say that it was America who was doing anything. He said, generally, he was accusing the leadership in Ukraine, which is not friendly to him. Well, his position is they are fascists, they are Nazis. So that's a classical way of earlier Soviet Union. Anybody who is an opponent is a Nazi for them, because that is the only great war they have won against Nazis. Though they had an agreement with Hitler of non-aggression, and when Poland was taken by Hitler, and a huge massacre was happening in Poland, well, Stalin did not say a single word at that time because there was a non-aggression treaty with them. Later only they became a part of the army and took the credit of defeating the Nazis, which was also fought by all other countries, Britain and USA and all other countries. Anyway, but this is not what is accused by Putin. And unfortunately, you can send a message to Putin, put this argument also in your next speech, but he did not say it so far. So what he said was the present government is not coming to terms with the historical alliance it had with Russia, is what he said day before yesterday. Because it was part of Russia, it was part of the Russian Empire, it was part of Soviet Union. So we built it up, we gave money, and we built up all the centers there. We built up the nuclear center there. So historically, it's ours. So it was because of us that you are there. Therefore, we have a right. That's a hegemonical approach. Not respecting the sovereignty of some other country, telling that in the past, in some other form, we have helped you, therefore, you should obey us. But that is the position that internationally we have a system that every single country, however small it is, has a kind of absolute sovereignty, and that has to be respected by every other country. That is to be respected by any other country. Now, another argument that you said, which Putin has taken back, but you still argue for Putin, which he has swallowed already. Putin has in the earlier part of the conflict, he said, well, they go to NATO and that's against this agreement. But did they join NATO? They did not join NATO. Come on, I mean, what are you speaking? I mean, anybody who knows it. No, come on.
In 2020.
Come on, don't speak in between, because you spoke many things which are not correct or unacceptable, and I heard that. That's a tradition of our meeting, that no internal conflict of conversation is allowed in this meeting. So when you speak, I would not interfere. When I speak, you should not interfere. Okay. So, of course, many countries around Russia are afraid of this mighty country because they have a tradition of claiming control on other countries. Historically, Karelia is part of Russia. We want Karelia with us. What they said in 1939 and tried to attack Finland. They wanted to capture Finland like this. Why? Because they wanted Finland. Very simple. It has a lot of timber. It has a lot of natural resources. It's a rich country, and they wanted to annex it. So they found reason. And that's the way, I mean, but of course they were, driven back. They were defeated and sent back. And that is why that was not spoken about much. They tried it on Finland in 1939 during Stalin's time. But the same argument is taken. If 1991, what was the situation? That was promised by whom? Promised by the different unions, different nationalities at that time, with Gorbachev and with the Western world. Now the situations have changed. Any country can reconsider anything. Then Russia changed many things. Russia had an agreed rule at that time that a president shall be ruling only for 2 terms. Didn't he change that? He became the prime minister and put his president as his prime minister as the president and ruled, and again came. And now the law of the land has been changed just for him. So there was a law earlier. So therefore, we should all eternally keep that law and change. For him to become again prime minister, he could change his own country's constitution with a unilateral sweeping without any practical way of opposing it, and he could do it. But an autonomous sovereign republic, after 30 years of one statement with some former leader, if they want to change, they have a full right to do whatever they want. Any autonomous country, any sovereign country has a right to do what they want. It's not in Russia that they do. That's a different country. Russia has no business in another sovereign country's private affairs. What they feel insecure. Therefore, they want protection. Now it is proved that their anxieties and ambiguities was correct. They said they are afraid that Russia would come and attack someday. So therefore, they wish to become a part of NATO. They wish to become a part of NATO because they felt, they smelled, they understood, they sensed that Russia can be an aggressor. That is the reason that they wanted to be part of NATO. And their apprehension, their fear was correct. And that is why a free Ukraine would now join into NATO very confidently. They should also, because that is something they have been afraid, and everybody said that, come on, there is no need of any fear about Russia. But Russia has shown to the world that they were right. The Ukraine was very right. What they sensed was very, very right. That was it. Anyway, at this moment, they have not joined. There was an application which is not accepted yet, and that is there. So, and now Putin has gone back from that. Day before yesterday, he made a speech to the world. And he doesn't speak about 1/10 of the whole speech is only about NATO. He said, beyond that, there are other reasons, is what he says. That is what many people think is the reason that we are invading Ukraine. But there are other reasons. There are Nazis coming up there. Well, if there is any leadership in the country, any kind of position in the country is not acceptable to a neighboring country, what is his right? What is the locus standi of Russia to come to Ukraine and said, well, who is ruling your country is not in our taste. And this guy is having Nazi tendencies, not against us. In their tendencies, they have it. Therefore, we go and we can take control of the country and we decide who will rule there. If somebody says in that tone, they'll be out of United Nations. That's against the fundamental principle of United Nations that every country has its sovereignty. And they're breaking that fine idea. Whether, these people were having Nazi tendencies, which is something Putin says, But the present president was elected with a huge majority in a free and fair election, not like the Russian election, where the opposition leaders were in jail. There was a free and fair election happening there. And the president was elected with a huge support. And what is Putin's locus standi? What is his right to interfere into the internal affairs of another country? And who gave him the right to do that? And if he can do that, somebody can attack any country, any neighboring country, if they don't like that country's behavior. India can attack, for example, India did not like the way Tamils were handled in Sri Lanka. Would that give India a right to go and attack and annex Sri Lanka? The way Tamil liberation tigers were handled was not to the tunes of India. Would it give us a right to do that? India did not like that Nepal became a part of an alliance wherein China, there was a military agreement even with China. Would that give us a reason to annex Nepal? If that logic, what you say, is correct, the world order will completely collapse. That's not possible. That's not what the spirit of the world nations are now.
Yes. So next we have Kunjata Chandrahasa with us.
Good evening, Sanal. My question is, you are referring India for the mediation because India is a close friend of Russia. But on the other side, India is also a member of the Quad. That is Japan, US, Australia, and India. We have one Quad alignment. And naturally, of late, for the last 2-3 years, we have slight tilt towards the American side also. So in that position, India is in a very awkward position to deal with that. This is what the people in India also, some of the people say. I don't know what is the final position of India. That is one point. And the second point, you are telling a lot of sanctions for the Russians are coming from various corners. But Russia is also supplying gas to these Germany and other European countries. So what will be the impact of that and what will happen? These are my two questions.
Number one, I come to the second question first. This was what Putin always thought, that European Union would not take a very serious stand. They may be very careful because of the petrol or gasoline coming from Russia. So there is an alternative in the European Union. Norway is the biggest store of petroleum products in the whole world, more than Saudi Arabia or any other country. Norway is the richest country in the whole world because of its petroleum. So, Norway is part of the whole, the European system. The whole idea of Europe is also part of, that includes Norway. And Norway could be one major source of petroleum, which is possible for Europe. Also, one has to understand that Norway is one country which is not using their own petrol, but shifting the whole transportation or the motor vehicle business into electric energy. If you go to Norway, you don't see any more in the urban cities. For example, I've been to Oslo 2 years back. I found that half the cars are running on electricity, auto-driven cars and electric cars. But instead of petrol bunks, they have battery changing centers. You go and take a new battery and put on your car. All the new cars are electric cars. They have the biggest storage of petroleum in whole of Europe, more than Russia. So that could be one source. This was seriously considered, as I understand, by Europe. But the economic consequence for Europe would be much heavier than many people would think. Therefore, Putin thought that Europe would not dare to do it because they want our petrol. So the second day after the attack, European Union decided to stop all trade relations with Russia and freeze all assets of Russia in Europe, which means that they decided to take that risk, the economic risk, beyond. That's what, they understand capital. That's the whole problem when they understand capital. They consider Europe as a capitalist society, which would go for the interest of the capital only. That was the wrong assessment because Putin is coming from the communist background originally. He was the KGB chief during the communist regime.
Yeah.
And his mental framework is of that sort. So he would understand capitalism is a classical idea that they have, that capitalism is based on the interest of the capital and they would not do anything when it comes to matters of money. No, but European Union took a principled position here. They decided to jeopardize their economic interests and said that we are sanctioning everything connected with Russia and there would be no more connection and all wealth here is frozen, and that is the decision. And Germany is using petrol from Russia, but Germany has sent several tanks to Ukraine already. Even Finland, the immediate neighbor, is sending weapons to Ukraine. All European countries are doing. France is doing. All countries are doing. So they don't care what's the economic consequences. Perhaps Europe can simply afford it. That's number one. Number two, the first question, that's an interesting question. India's status in the international scene. India has a big position in the international scene. Mainly because we are a huge sized economy, number one. There may be poor people in India, but the size of the economy is very, very high, very big. And the buying power of the middle class in India is very high. And I mean that the middle class in India with buying power is larger than the whole American population. And that's something that is very, very important. And India is a big buyer of weapons in the world. India is a marketplace of products from all around the world. And Indian software engineers are running the whole software world all across the world. So India has an important position. And moreover, by size with the population, India is the largest democracy in the world. So India cannot be undermined. And with new connection with Japan and USA and all, I mean, India has tilted. I mean, we are no more a non-aligned country. I mean, it's very clearly India is tilted towards the West. It's very, very clear.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, your observation is very correct. But strategically, India has made a very clever position during the voting in United Nations. If you have seen, India did not vote with the West. India abstained in voting. That's a clever move, in my opinion, because anyway, one knows that this would be passed because Russia has veto power and they would veto it. But if they vote against that, you have taken a position antagonistic. It's a purposeless position. So India has abstained along with China. But India is taking an initiative to avoid the war or reduce the war. But India has the first priority is bringing out the Indians there. That's the first priority. Once that is over, India can take a very serious position. India has a persuasive power. Though we are in alliance with Japan and Australia and America and all these countries at one side, we still have trade relations with Russia. We are still buying oil from Russia. We are still, exporting wheat to Russia. And there are a lot of connections with Russia. So therefore, we have a persuading power, number one. Number two, that persuading power will work more when slowly Russia will get the taste of the war. That, things are going in a direction that was not in his expectation. The sudden response from European Union, now the air passages are blocked. No other country in Europe is allowing Russian flights to go above it. That's a very big move today. Never it happened after Second World War. I mean, in such a big way. These are all things which was going beyond the economic interest of all these countries. So beyond the interest of capital, European Union has taken a very principled position, which is very, very appreciable. So therefore, Russia gets the taste of it now. And therefore, it may want to come out of this scene unscathed, and there should be an escape route provided to Russia. And that could be the possibility of India, coming that India is taking an initiative and responding to that, Putin can go back and, he can save his face. So India should grab this opportunity and use this opportunity to emerge as the world negotiator. That's what I always propose as a possible role that India can have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now from Clubhouse, Kunyamma, please.
Good evening. It was a great talk, and we were all watching what is happening in Ukraine. And we made a great discussion today. And I thought Putin has a power to stay in until 2036. I don't know if this is right or not. And also, I hope India has a great chance to mediate this. Like you already said, we are trying to bring the students back from Ukraine to India. Then India will go forth with it. I hope it happens. I think India already agreed to Ukraine also to keep a peace force there also. I don't know where China stand in this. I think China may help also along with India to make sense with Mr. Putin. To make a ceasefire rather than killing innocent children, women, and elderly people, and whole total Ukrainians. Hope this happens. But why Putin went to Ukraine while, as far as I know, he has a chance to be the president of the Russia till 2036. And also, we are very happy to see you, Mrs. Shakti. You come to join with us in your father's discussion. We like you to come back again. Thank you.
Okay. Now, why Putin should do it when he has a possibility to remain in power till 2036? No, he would have a chance to remain in power till 2036 only when he is re-elected. That's the point. So there's an election. So he earlier, only for 2 times you can be president. Then you should have one gap and you should not be able to contest again. That he has overcome by putting his prime minister as the president, and he remained as prime minister for 1 term. Well, still remaining as prime minister, he controlled the whole scene. And then again, he came back to power. Now the second 2 terms would come to an end after that also. Now he made a rule that one can, from that, a new set of rules come. And there'll be 3 terms now from that day onwards. So if now in the coming 3 times when he is re-elected, then he can remain till 1936. Okay. Then he can even change that law. That's a law which he can change. He can be an exception. Like in China, they can easily do it. So there is no guarantee that he would come. Now, if you read Time magazine, the last issue of Time magazine is focusing the opposition leader of Putin, who was poisoned with plutonium, and it was cured in Germany and returned back now. And now he's in jail. So there's a huge support coming for him. So he's comparatively young as compared to Putin. Putin is in his 60s. He's 67 or something like that. And this guy, Alexei Navalny, is in jail and the world attention is going on him. So he's a challenger. So he could be a big threat to him in the coming elections, including Western support. That's something he wants to avoid because he wants to win the election also. Otherwise, he cannot remain in power. So that's number 1. Number 2, if he want to do it, the kind of deaths happening there, children are dying, all these kind of things would not be a big issue for ruthless politicians who would declare war. And no politician from times immemorial, from the times of Roman Empire, did not stop a war thinking that some people will die and some children will die and some people will become orphans. That's pacifist, peace-loving people speaking like that. Political power is connected with the capturing and acquiring and expansion and all these kind of things. Despite the systems changed and we have democracies and we have new international order, the whole old pattern still remains without much change. So this continues. So this is not the issue for them, that some people will die or some children will die. No war has ended because of such considerations. Because war declaring countries don't have such considerations. They have other priorities. Sadly, that's the reality. Therefore, that's not the reason that he's onto it. The reason is internal compulsion, number 1. Number 2, this is an economically powerful area. And also the control of the Chernobyl plant, nuclear plant. And the biggest arsenal storage is in Ukraine of the earlier Soviet Union. So he wanted to bring it all in his control. It's a grabbing more power strategically and militarily. Now, you have said about a question of China, whether China would be interested. China may not be interested. Why? Because China is more interested in capital than the capitalist countries. If you look at, China is interested in 3 things. Number 1, they are looking for new strategic entries in geopolitically important areas, like in Afghanistan. They supported blindly the Taliban. They gave them weapons. They helped them come to power by overthrowing this elected government. And China is very happy that they have an entrance there. They have a very close relation with Taliban, though officially not very publicly seen. But on the other side, China has interest in Uganda, for example. They have lent money. That's the second way of doing it. They're lending money. And once you lend money, then they have very hard terms and you cannot pay back the money. They will control the system. Uganda, in Kampala, the airport is being now, China wants to control that because they could not pay the loan in time. That's one way of control. But here, they have no military possibility. There is no strategic interest which can be achieved. So therefore, China may not come into this scene. They would see their national interest. China wants to become a big economic power and retain their economic power, and they don't want to get in a conflict with the United States because the Chinese business, the production in China, more than 50% of the production in China is for United States. And who would want to jeopardize that? China would want a better relation with the United States. They would muscle a little bit, but they would not do anything serious, is what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Punyama. Thank you, Sanal sir. I think Sandeep, you are next.
Hello. Hi. Yes, thanks. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the speech. Let me start by saying I don't support this war and I am completely against what Putin has done.
Can you speak a little louder?
Hello, is it better?
Yeah, better, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying I don't support the war and I don't support any action done by Putin this time. And any statement that is trying to justify the Putin's war, this war, I feel that is absurd and unacceptable. I have two questions, if that is okay. What did you think will be the exit strategy for Putin from here? I see most of the legislation, like even the opposition leader is supporting pro-Euro, pro-NATO. So he cannot put the opposition leader there, or he will have to bring some pro-Russian leader if he wants to make that a puppet state, or he'll have to annex it. And the second question is, I am a bit confused on with the 2014 events. 2014, when the pro-Russian was the majority there, and during that revolution, within 3 months of time frame, the pro-Russian majority was dissolved. That party is gone. The leaders of that party is gone, and now once which was a majority coalition, that complete coalition was dissolved in 3 months to 2 years. All the leaders were arrested. And there are indications, there are allegations, and even some proof, including Victoria Nuland's leaked audio that points fingers to America. So I feel those kind of intrusions or those kind of actions from other countries, like be it America or some other country, in some nations to create a puppet state or create a favorable state. That is a warlike crime, and I want to know what are your thoughts on that. I feel those also should be condemned at in these scenarios, and those also should be trialed. I would like to know your opinion on that. Thanks.
See, 2014, what happened cannot be a reason for what you do, something like in 2022. If something was to be responded to, if somebody doubted, for example, I would not say that, I would not, I would agree only that, there were, other interests working in such things. All around the world, whatever happens is not spontaneously happening. There are international interests working on that. There are other countries having strategical interests. All these kind of things are working in all countries, everywhere. And whatever public opinion is built up, we all know that it may not be open or honest public opinion, but it could be manipulated public opinion. These all are correct. Maybe in 1914, there were interests of Western forces, who wanted to see that this state is not in the control of Russia, should remain like that. There should be a change. But there was no categorical proof brought out to the international fora that should corner any country for the action that happened in 2014. Russia did not bring to any international fora any evidence, for example, to explain that 2014 what happened was something against them and there was international interference into that. That was a media discussion. That was a discussion in the pro-Russia groups internationally or anti-American camps. That was a discussion. Russia, who decides? How would we know about it? Did Russia bring it out with documents to the United Nations? Proving that, there have been interference in this by other countries. So he called not interference. Even now he doesn't say that. He said they're Nazis, is what he says. That's a term he uses. He didn't say, even in the day before yesterday's speech, he didn't accuse any other force, including America, doing something in the past. He said there are Nazis, is what he's saying. And imagine the elected president of Ukraine now is a person from the Jewish background. And he called all these people as Nazis. That's the allegation, not American support or anything. He would only say that they were hegemonic, they were suppressing the opposition, there have been annihilation of people. That is the allegation made by Putin. Not he didn't put any allegation on other countries or interference of other countries at that time. Number one. Number two, something happened in 2014, which in Putin's point of view, it was not correct, or Russian point of view, it was not correct, or the left in the world did not like it. Okay, one can say that. But after 6 years, not 6 years, after 8 years, can one simply go to country? 8 years back, there's something happened in your country which did not come to our liking. Therefore, now we come and take your country. Can that be a logic that stands anytime? If that was such a serious move that they felt a big butchery of democracy happening on that country, well, whether Putin has the legitimate right to speak about democracy with his own acts in his own country is another question. But even with that, that was not even raised as a big issue internationally at that time. Of course, America is an international player. We all know that. America has its own interest. It has its own economic interest. It has its own military interest. It has its own strategic interest. And they play games in many parts of the world. Sometimes their games are failure also, like in Afghanistan. It was a failure. So all the games that America play are not won. So now that cannot be a reason for any action now, number one. And also that was not, only Putin, the only argument that Putin takes forward is there are Nazis and that the government is not suppressing them properly. Well, that's a neighbor's issue. In a neighboring house, if somebody is not suppressing and a stupid boy there, well, I go there and take control of that house. It's not a justification. It's a sovereign country. It's their right. It's their way to handle their country. You can go to international bodies against that. You cannot go with your army and take over a country. That's one position. Second, the first question that you asked is a very important question. What can be an exit route that one can provide to Russia? An exit route is important because no country would agree for a humiliation. No country would. If you accuse some country with something, they would make some counter allegation. So the best way to get something accepted is giving an exit route, a decent and dignified exit route, which the head of the nation should be able to talk to its people. Well, we have saved our face and we have made a success. You should be able to say that. If you don't give that opportunity, at any cost, they would continue. So he will be forced now, to my judgment, he will be forced now to have either entrapped in a prolonged war. He's not going to get a walkover. Either he will be entrapped in a prolonged war or he'll be humiliated there. Humiliation is something not good for Putin because that will affect his credibility. So for what he has done this thing, if one judgment goes is against his own opposition, in front of the opposition, in front of the critics in his own country, this will be a wrong message that he has had a humiliation withdrawal. So therefore, he would not agree for that. At any cost, he will continue. Therefore, one has to provide him a dignified exit. One has to show and open a door and allow him to go peacefully. Rest can be done later. So that's where I was telling that a negotiation by some other countries either by Japan or India or Australia or some other countries should take a lead in negotiation and propose a dignified exit route. Because he now already got the taste that the European Union would not simply sit idle because they buy petrol and that's important for them. No, they have decided we don't want it. They have taken a very strong position in the first day itself. Now Germany is already sending weapons. Sweden is sending weapons and France has agreed to send weapons. So when is this war going to be a success for Putin? When all the European powers are giving money and weapons, it will be a war front for a long time. He would not get a walkover. So his plans, 3 plans. Number 1, either to get the whole country annexed. No, it's not possible anymore. There is resistance. And if you want to divide the country into 2 and make a buffer country in between the other country and his country, well, that may not be possible because there can be still resistance going on there also. It cannot be a peaceful country. And the third thing would be simply overthrowing the government. And as you rightly said, in 2014, he would bring a puppet government there. So that would not be accepted by any international community. Listen, getting acceptance by international community is very, very important. Otherwise, you will be starving like Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not recognized by any international countries now. There are food and some emergency supplies given there, but you cannot have anything if the world does not accept it. With Russian support alone, Russia itself is now cornered by the whole world and sanctions from all other countries. And how would they get their supplies? Once, the present supply line is all connected with the European Union. And once it goes, and if you go back to Russia as the sole supplier of your material and stuff for your day-to-day living, that won't work. So it may not be possible for for successfully continuing a puppet government so they have to behave something like an annexed land or a part of Russia only. So that may not be good for them. Nobody would accept that also. No other country would recognize a puppet government now in Ukraine. So the ideal thing is, the first thing that you said is that who should now give a decent exit route to Putin as the earliest possible? Well, that's a challenge. So I would say that, if I would watch the Indian political scene, if I were in some position to speak seriously about Indian politics, I would say that, come on, this is an opportunity, grab it and use it and emerge as a big move, situation changer. That would what I would advise. Thank you.
Okay. Sandeep, do you have any other questions?
No, I just want to add one comment. No way I am accusing America for what's happening in Ukraine today. This is a choice by Putin, and this is a war created by Putin alone. And I'm not accusing America for doing anything in 2014 for the result of this. My concern or my confusion was what America, I feel that all those allegations are pointing to what that done in 2014 is also wrong. And I think that is also a war-like crime and that need to be criticized too. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I would not dispute that. I would say that, what happened in 2014 can be seen from different angles. I would not support American policies on different fronts in the world. I would not support that. America has unnecessarily interfered into many parts of the world and made lives miserable for a lot of people in different parts of the world, starting from Vietnam, to Iraq and many other parts of the world. So 2014, right or wrong, that's a different question. And if you have to condemn 2014 to start speaking about the present crisis is also another question. We should not start like that. The present question is independent of all these kind of things. 8 years back, what happened in that country is the problem, is the key problem is not even what Putin now accuses. Of course, that has triggered conflicts, and he wanted a puppet government, and he almost got a puppet government, which was no more existing there. So his interests are very clear. There is economic interest, military interest, strategic interest. A lot of interests are there. So I'm not a supporter of American policies. Don't take it in that way. I would say that, the global crisis and conflicts should go. That's my interest. And I would say in the interest of the pacifism, in the interest of peace, in the interest of peaceful living, we should cease all these hostilities and conflict, and we should find ways to end this war. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to Deepak. Thank you so much. My question is related to what the West is doing. I do watch Fox News sometimes, not because I like watching Fox News, just to know what a lot of the Americans like to hear. And what I hear there is a lot of condemnation against Putin. Lots of people who come on as guests say that he is an autocratic dictator and so on and so forth, which is probably true. And my question is, unlike a small country, Russia is capable of having a war with more countries than Ukraine. And the steps that the West has taken to completely isolate Russia, taking them off the SWIFT system alone can collapse the entire Russian economy. But they've done a lot of steps, like closing their airspaces, banning Aeroflot. UK banned Aeroflot from landing in the UK, and so on and so forth. It looked like most of their cards, which are non-military actions, have already been done by the West. And now if Putin truly is someone who doesn't really care about bombs being dropped on Moscow or Russian people dying, what is stopping him from attacking one of the NATO nations by saying that it is NATO that is now arming Ukraine, and therefore when you arm Ukraine, you're actually fighting against Russia. So why would Putin not attack, say, Romania or Poland or even Germany, which is the route through which the arms come into Ukraine? So if he's not doing that, or the West appears super confident that he's not going to do that based on probably the foreign policy analysts who've been analyzing Putin for decades have said. Otherwise, I don't understand how they're so confident in imposing all these sanctions against Russia and not expecting retaliatory action in the form of military action from Russia to one or two of these NATO countries and drag the whole world into World War III. So I just wanted to know your opinion on this particular thought that I had. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the serious threat. That's the real issue. For example, if Putin is going reckless, and if he feels that he will get a humiliating defeat, he will go to any extent to save his face. So if he does not study a lesson, he can be simply, if he's anyway losing, then he would take the biggest risk of attacking any NATO country or a non-NATO country, for example. He has many other countries around him. For example, Finland is not a non-NATO country. 1939, the mighty Soviet Union had a humiliating defeat from tiny Finland. So, there is fear all around that people are not thinking. West is not that confident that Putin would not attack anyone. No, it's not like that. All around Europe, there's a fear of war. That's the ground reality. All around, he could be going reckless now. Because if he is attacked if there is bombing on any part of Russia, he can be reckless. He can go anywhere. So if there is a nuclear weapon used, even on a very tiny level, it can have disastrous results all around Europe. What he would want from, this Ukraine, he would not get Ukraine, but he would lose his country also. He would not want to lose Russia at any case. That's very clear. He could go to any extent to keep Russia under his mighty control. So it would not be, a shocking thing. It cannot be simply ruled out that he would not attack any country. Why would not he do it? He could do it only when he is totally humiliated. That's a dangerous situation. That's a very dangerous situation. So to save the face, he has wrong judgment on international fronts every time. Because this was a wrong judgment. SWIFT, taking him out of SWIFT is something probably he never thought. The whole economy is closed with that. Without SWIFT, access, how would there be any international transaction now possible? There is a possibility, still there are loopholes available, but that can also be closed. So this is something that is not expected. He even did not expect that the European Union would come out with a sanction, but it happened within 24 hours. In 24 hours, it was declared, the sanctions. So what is the right strategy in a war like this? The best strategy is cutting off the supply lines. Like the logistic support is to be stopped. So the monetary support, monetary possibilities of Russia has to be reduced. So then they are weaker and weaker with that. So with their whole assets abroad and their transactions from the oil trade or any kind of international transaction, if that is not coming, and legally it's not possible to send money to Russia, I mean, how would they have products? And people would suffer. Already Russian people are suffering. As compared to Western life, I mean, there is a huge difference in the quality of life in the Western world and what is in Russia. I mean, Soviet Union times, it was still worse. It has improved, but still very backward as compared to the Western living standards. So there'll be more and more trouble in Russia economically when there is sanction all around. The flights cannot go, people cannot travel, you cannot travel, go and study anywhere, and you cannot do any business elsewhere. There are Russian families abroad, they cannot send money, they cannot come back. The borders are closed and nobody has any trade with Russia. This is something very fast happening. And above all, weapons are going from Germany. All countries are providing money and weapons. Did he expect this? I don't think he has expected this. He thought it would be something like a easy walkover on this country and others will be silent. They will be afraid of the nuclear weapons. So therefore, the possibility that he would try to, if he is not given an escape route without having a humiliating defeat, what can be, I mean, he can be ruthless. He can be, out of all senses. And he just want to have a very, very unwise decisions, I mean, advised by some people, like Hitler had. One has to compare Putin's behavior, like how Hitler was entrapped into a situation that he cannot go back. So he would have expected, like Hitler has defeated Poland, the then Soviet Union was silent. They did not do anything. They were not worried about fascism. When people were, when millions of people were simply put in gas chamber, I mean, Soviet Union was silent because there was an agreement of non-aggression between Russia and Hitler at that time, Soviet Union and Russia at that time. Later only they joined the war. So similarly, I mean, this is something guarantees people that, well, others don't want to interfere. But here people are responding very fast. So that would make him, in a kind of a helpless situation and can make very dangerous moves, like attacking any other NATO country. Any NATO country, if Putin attacks, that would be ending up bombing. And I mean, the war escalates completely. And before that, I mean, one is expecting all such things. That is why all economic resources of Russia is curtailed and making Russia weakened. And see, now you don't get GPS in Russia, international GPS, you don't get there. There is no Twitter, he himself is closing down a lot of things. Social media is completely closed down. You cannot make international calls to Russia now. It's all getting completely blocked. So it's easy for him to continue with that, but there'll be new ways to getting information. So the world should try to give him an easy exit now. That's the best way to handle the situation. Not to making humiliating defeat. That won't work. So one should give him an easy exit out of the war, not with a little face-saving device to be given, so that he could save his face to the people, at least for now. So he feels at least safe that, well, I mean, I didn't lose much. Well, I've shown my power and came back or something like that. But he would still have all these sanctions for many more years to come. So he has to face it. But such a reckless behavior, if it comes from him, that can be disaster to the whole world. That's why I suggest that the countries like India or Japan or Australia or, I mean, these kind of countries have a role which can be played. I would always say that India has an important possibility. Indian foreign minister has so far, spoken very, very carefully. And that's a good sign. And India has a possibility to take an initiative, take a leading position, not to make any military action or anything, but a persuasive power to put in reason in the mind of this guy. And if that works, he will get an easy exit. Otherwise, it can go out of hand.
Okay. So now we have one question from Zoom. So I think let's take up one from here. We have Sona with us. I would just ask you to proceed with your question.
Fukushima and this one, is it anyway related? Both of the nuclear reactors got blasted and expired. Are they going to taking over the Japan also for power or anything like that? By Russian army.
Now, if I understood correctly, have you been asking about the Chernobyl nuclear plant?
Yes.
Yeah, the Chernobyl nuclear plant it's not on the way out. It's still active, and it's still, it has its capacities. And there was a leakage earlier. Of course, that's solved, but it can be recommissioned. Most of these nuclear plants can be recommissioned with its capacities. So some plants, for example, some part of the plant, for example, is no more functioning, and its time is over. And if it's it phased out, you can recommission it with the new stages. So Chernobyl is still active, and Chernobyl is still producing nuclear capacity and energy also. And moreover that, one of the biggest storage of nuclear arsenal, nuclear bombs that is in Ukraine. The Soviet Union had the nuclear plants and nuclear storage is in Ukraine. Imagine if somebody bombs Ukraine. It can be big damage to the entire Europe. Millions of people will perish. That's why it's dangerous. It's a war. It's a kind of adventure with the life of this planet. That's why it's very, very dangerous.
Okay. And second question is recent economic question I would like to ask. Cryptocurrencies were originated by, I guess, by Mr. Satoshi or something in Japan, and in some theories, people used to say like by some criminal used to made it. So, is there any relation between these two? These two people.
If you are speaking about cryptocurrency and crypto economy in connection with the present conflict, there is no suggestion so far in that direction.
Okay, sorry.
If it is an alternate, economy parallelly coming up, many countries are angry with that, but many countries are accepting it also. Whether it can swallow the present economic system and make a parallel, or it can contribute to it is still in dispute. There's a lot of possibility of money laundering in crypto.
Yes.
That is one of the reasons that many countries are discouraging it. India, for example, has discouraged crypto transactions, but many European countries are still encouraging it. There is no issue for them. But so far, there is no indication or evidence to show that it is connected. The present conflict and cryptocurrency or crypto issues are involved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for a great discussion today, especially when Indian media and also social media is trying to present Putin as a hero, right, and trying to blame everything on America. So my question here is to Sanal sir is, I know there's a lot of criticism here. I'm in America, and a lot of criticism here, like the current President Biden and the administration is relatively weak. That's the reason Putin is trying to do this. But while following closely with, especially with Secretary Antony Blinken, he's doing an amazing job of uniting NATO as well as gaining support from Europe, right? So what is your take how this current US administration is handling the situation now?
I think the personal health of a person or how he speaks softly or very loudly is not what decides how powerful he is. Trump was, of course, very powerfully speaking, and he had huge voice, which can be raised. But that doesn't make him more powerful than Biden. Biden is a very soft-spoken person, and I don't think that he's a weak president in any situation. He's one should be wiser. When you have a lot of power at your disposal, that doesn't mean that you should speak like a despot. The more power you have in your hand, you should speak like a wiser person, because potential of implying danger to the rest of the world is more when you have more power. The most powerful person should speak very wisely about aggression and weapon, and the richest person should speak like a humble person vis-a-vis money. I mean, that's how always it should be. So any kind of, overwhelming sound making is of no meaning here. America has its own, weaponry power. And that is why, all the political opponents of America is so afraid of its political power, because the military power of America is very, very powerful. It can reach out to any part of the world very fast. And the size of American economy is very, very big. It's more than 50% of the entire transaction of the world that American economy size is. That doesn't mean make it a moral state. No state is moral by principle. Every state has its own national interests, and America has its own national interest also. And therefore, whether America has gone down with Biden is not a question to be considered at all, because how much American system will go down when a president changes? The system runs with a lot of checks and balances. The armament storage of America is not decided by a president. It's almost decided by a system. And nobody can control the American economy as a president can by sign something or change something. It runs on its own mechanism, because American economy is controlled by the forces of capital, the forces of market. So that's not controlled by one president with one decision, like a country of despots ruling. So I don't think America has gone weak, but that doesn't mean that I would approve American role in the international politics on many things. In India, for example, especially in those parts where America is seen as the force of imperialism, there is a classical anti-American position. Whatever America does can be wrong. It should be wrong only, because America is against Soviet Union, which was part of the communist system. So the left, for example, the urban left generally, or the academic left generally, would speak against America, whether they're right or wrong. America is not a player here. So if Russia is unhappy about America, that doesn't mean that you have to take a position in considering America. Also, a kind of a rhetoric position that somebody is against I'm against somebody. Therefore, whatever he does is wrong, is a wrong way of seeing things. One has to see what is right and wrong and judge each situation based on the ground realities that is controlling that situation, not on the basis of prejudices. That is a kind of a narrow political scheme. You have your prejudices and you can take only decisions within that framework. That's a very narrow approach. So here, America is not a player. The player is Russia. And the other side, it's Ukraine. And perhaps NATO is one place where he wants to get support from, or the European Union. So here, taking a position to see, seeing what America is doing is one thing. But in that case, one should always think that, they should be against Britain, they should be against Germany, they should be against France, they should be against Finland, they should be against Sweden, they should be against Netherlands, all these countries, the whole of European Union and UK. For example, Boris Johnson has said, we will not sit idle in such a situation. He repeatedly said many times. So you can be enemy with the UK, you can be enemy with the European Union, you can be enemy with America, and you can still be friends with maybe Putin. See, that's one way of reaching. That's a reductionist approach. You are enemy of somebody, therefore you have to take a decision. You don't want to see the merit of things. So I would say that one has to see the merit of things, and there is no way that one can justify the action of Putin. He behaves like a dictator, a despot, and an invader.
Absolutely. I don't have any question on about Putin. Just checking, right, whether it is Republican Party or Democrat Party.
Yeah.
Will it have made any difference here, right, in this situation?
I think, Trump, despite many people would say that Trump is speaking very loud, Trump was not a warmonger. One has to see that. For example, he almost avoided a conflict with North Korea. He has gone down. He tried to meet this guy. So despite his, the loud speaking, one could say that, he was not a warmonger. If Trump were in this position now, he would have made a lot of statements, but I don't know what he would do exactly. I cannot judge it. But American policies are to be decided, at least ideally, they are to be decided with the interest of a larger idea of freedom, which is not exactly at this moment for a long time now. But America has a great foundation. The founding fathers of America has imagined that country as a great country with a lot of values. And it has gone away from those values, starting from Vietnam War, one would see that. So it has to come back to its old great heritage of George Washington and Jefferson and all these kind of founding fathers who had great ideas about a nation. And that's where America has to find its roots. I mean, if Trump was there, if there could be a different policy of America, I cannot judge. I cannot say that. I don't think it's easily possible like that, because he would be advised by strategic advisors. He cannot take a private decision on matters. Military advisors will advise him what to do, and he cannot simply overcome such things. It may not be very easy, and one has to sanction funds for that, and that is checked by the Senate and Congress. It's not very easy to go on a private decision. So therefore, any American president would do things based on American interests only, whether it is Biden or Trump. I know that what Republicans are speaking, they're speaking that Biden is a weak president, Trump would have done it better, this and that. But that must be internal political reasons that they are speaking. But I don't think any given president can take a different decision without the advice of the military advisory board and the policy advisors.
Thank you. I have something to add, Sanal sir.
Yeah, please.
Actually, I saw a statement from Trump 2 weeks before. And on that interview on Fox News, he told that if I am the president, Putin even think of conquering this state, no, Ukraine, because I will deal with Putin with my personal attachment with Putin, and I not allowed Ukraine to enter a war. That is his statement.
Yeah, that's the argument of persuasion. Come on, I mean that's a good position. Whomso said it. I would still say that the persuasion is the best strategy in a conflict, the opening the diplomatic avenues than a violent conflict. So persuasion would work. There was a personal rapport between Trump and Putin. That's very well known. They have been good friends. So that is what I was trying to suggest, that the Indian Prime Minister, for example, also has a very good rapport with the Putin. So a personal initiation, sometimes an initiative, sometimes can make a very big difference. So that doesn't guarantee anything. That's an effort that can be tried. Diplomatic avenues does not mean that ambassadors should go and meet, but taking it all on a personal level, you can communicate, dialogue is opened up, and the conflicts can be resolved by that process. I'm always for diplomatic and persuasive solutions and politics of consensus than conflict.
Thank you. Srijit, I hope you have no other questions.
No, I'm good. Thank you for taking my
Yeah. Okay. Shubhi, please.
So now we have Saptarshi Bhattacharya with us. You may proceed with the question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening. Yeah.
Sir, there are two things I would like to know. One, from the point of India, like India is going to buy a lot of weapons from Russia, like S-400 we are going to buy, and we have already paid a lot of money to them also. Some part of it we have received, but won't these sanctions harm Indian interest? Because we are, on one hand, we are looking at threat from China and Pakistan. So if these sanctions happen, for the Europeans to, because we have seen these sanctions, it hurts India most of the time. Because of this Iranian sanction also, it finally hurt the Indians. We could not trade with Iran properly. So in India's interest as such, it is not a very good thing that sanctions are happening. And number two, will China take it as an encouragement to now try to capture Taiwan after looking at Ukraine? What is your thought about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. If this logic is acceptable, that I don't like what the neighbor does in his country, therefore, I just want to change it and I go and take over it. Well, China, with this logic, can go to Taiwan and they capture Taiwan. Yes, and with that logic, it's possible. But that logic should not work. Every country, howsoever small it is, howsoever weak it is, has its own sovereignty, and that has to be respected. Like every individual, whatever financial status or economic status or political connections that they have, every individual has the same right like any other individual in the given society. Similarly, nations have the same right as a nation with their sovereign capacities when they are a nation, and that has to be respected. So if some neighboring country which is big does not like, and they can go and take over, this can happen in any other country. Tomorrow, China can take a part of Arunachal Pradesh, grab it, and they claim on it. They can do that. Or India can tomorrow say that, well, I mean, your independence was looked after by us, and come on, we take Bangladesh into us. And these kind of logics don't work. It should not work also. It should not work. So that is no logic to telling that I don't like what you do in your home, therefore I come and take your home. No, that's not a logic. So, I mean, you're right, absolutely right, that this cannot be a logic for governing countries. Then second part, I mean, which you said that, will these sanctions affect India? At this moment, may not be, because there is no UN sanction yet. On Iran, there was a UN sanction. So UN sanction is not possible at this moment because Russia itself can veto it. And India we did not vote, we abstained from the voting. But the European Union, Russia does not have much trade with other countries than European Union and India. So European Union has closed, there is no trade anymore. Everything is closed. And all assets in European Union, anywhere in the European Union is all frozen. Now SWIFT is now closing all economic transaction with Russia. So that's practically economic sanction. The SWIFT blockade can affect, for example, we won't be able to pay any money to Russia if SWIFT is closed. How would we pay money? We are part of the international monetary system. How would we transfer money if the international transaction is blocked completely? That there could be a barter system then coming up. So will it go to that extent to go into a trade? Well, India has been buying military equipments and weaponry from Russia. So this will affect Russia's one of the biggest markets. One has to also remember that the superpowers earn their major money from selling weapons. United States, China, France, all these countries are selling weapons. Russia, all these countries are selling weapons. And even the peaceful Nobel Peace Prize is coming from, partly it's coming from Sweden also. Sweden is also selling weapons internationally. Warfares, India has been buying from Sweden. So weapons are a major, source of income for very rich countries. So if India is not in a position to buy weapons from Russia, they lose a huge market. European Union is not buying any weapons from Russia, but India has been buying a lot of weapons from Russia. So this all will affect international orders. Therefore, in any situation, this conflict has to end, and it has to give to a reasonable end without much humiliation, because a humiliated end will end up in adventurous efforts, which can be very, very dangerous. So there should be an easy exit route. And for that, countries like India should take an initiative. That's one of the solutions that we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amal, next in Clubhouse. Amal.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, but I'll be quick on asking the questions. So my first question is I've been reading about a lot of articles that say that Ukraine was once the third largest Ukraine once had the third largest in terms of ammunition and nuclear power, and I think in some 1994 agreement they left it all out that they had to let go of all that nuclear power and nuclear weapons and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's nuclear weapons, but a lot of armed weapons and stuff like that because of an agreement. So I just want to say that, do you think the same thing which is happening right now, where Russia is invading Ukraine, and even though Ukraine is defending, but eventually everyone is expecting Ukraine to be taken over by Russia, but do you think the same thing would have happened had Ukraine not relieved all of its weapons in 1994?
Ukraine still has a lot of weapons. For example, the Chernobyl nuclear plant is still in Ukraine. There's a lot of nuclear heads still in Ukraine. So they have all these things. But most of these mighty things, they are not in full control. That's a very dangerous situation. When Ukraine is unstable, that can be a big threat to the whole world. That's number one. They whatever weaponry they have, Russia, though it was speaking about peace, it was one of the biggest collector of nuclear weapons. The world's largest nuclear weapons are with Russia. So they have a huge arsenal collection. No country in the whole world can fight with Russia with their nuclear weapons. Yes, one can fight, but that will be the end of the whole earth. United States and Russia, if they come to decide about a nuclear success or the other, maybe 1/10 of the nuclear weapons they can start. And with that, the whole thing will be a black, carbon piece, and there won't be anything left. So there is no meaning of all these weapons practically, because you cannot even use that. Everything will be over completely. So there is no question of comparing Russian military power or arsenal power with what Ukraine has. You cannot fight with your own weapons. And they don't have, for example, missiles are coming and they cannot fight. Now, more than 10,000 tanks or something like that are sent from Germany now. They don't have the economic power to counter Russia. So countries are sending the money. Rich countries, the richest countries in Europe, Germany and France, and all are sending money to them. And even small countries like Finland is sending from its stock weapons to Ukraine. So that's why, they are supported from every side. So for survival, that is why, no country, if, for example, Russia decides to put a nuclear bomb in Ukraine, no, I think it's not possible. I think with Russia also will perish with that. They would not go for that. And so they would want a victory over the territory. They would want a victory over the resources. They would want a victory over the geopolitical and strategic points there. So it's a very strategically important position that they have. Therefore, they want to control it. So, and if that is not possible, they will silently withdraw. That's it. Or they will be entrapped in a long war like America had in Vietnam, where they will never win. They will go for next 10 years, 15 years. They would not win. But that will end up Russia. Mighty empires have collapsed and ended up. If you remember what was the biggest power in Europe before the First World War, Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was the biggest power, mightier than the present Russia, and which has been controlling a vast area of Russia, which has huge monetary, wealth and arsenal power and great scholars and all these kind of things. Austria-Hungary was the biggest power in Europe. After the First World War, Austria-Hungary is no more existing. The empire has collapsed completely. Austria has shrinked into a tiny little country, and Hungary is another country. It's no more an economic power. It's all finished. Austria and Hungary itself got divided, and the whole empire got completely scattered and divided into anything. So mighty Russian empire, starting from the time of the Tsars, which controlled huge areas. A major part of the Europe and Asia was under the control of the Tsarist Russia. Again, with Soviet Union, it has all this hegemony over the whole area, with all the nationalities absorbed as unions. Now, history has its own way. If one goes in a very wrong direction and entrapped in a long war, like what America had in Vietnam, the difference is America was far away. Vietnam is in a different terrain and different continent. But on a border, if you are entrapped in a long war like that, that can be the end of Russian empire. History will have a new course. I would wish that Putin would not take that big risk, because Russia has a great history, great tradition, great literary and cultural background, and it has been part of the world. It should not go into several pieces and perish in history. So Putin, I hope, will not make that mistake for his personal interest and personal ambitions.
Yes, answer. I have a couple of 2 or 3 more questions, but I'll be quick about that. So you've given me the answer to this, but what I want to say there was that that was exactly my point, that both would be nuclear heads and both would be powerful nuclear nations, and would end up destroying the entire planet. So at that point, all the other nations, even let it be NATO, they would have had to interfere in such issues, even in a way they would have to directly confront both these powers and have to have made sure that a war take place. That was exactly what my point was, since both the countries was huge nuclear powers. If you wanted to add something, your questions are if you compare this situation to that of Afghanistan, like you said, Ukraine, I think, is a country with a lot of people supporting what the country or the country doing in Ukraine. What I mean by that is what they are trying to defend their own nation. So even if Russia wins this war within a couple of days or something like that, eventually it's an inevitable loss for Russia, right? Because we've been seeing this over and over again, let it be Vietnam or Afghanistan. If the people aren't in support of the regime, then eventually it will lose, especially in a place like Ukraine. And I just want to know your thoughts on that. And my last question is like, I just want to know like how much of a role does nationalism play in all of these things? Because like within the past like a couple of years, I've been hearing that nationalism is a dangerous thing from one side, and the other side I've been hearing that nationalism, you need nationalism in a country for it to survive, let it be militarily or anything like that. And I've been hearing these kinds of different views because like from Afghanistan, I've been seeing that a lack of nationalism might be the reason why the soldiers were not willing to fight. And here I'm seeing that because of pro-nationalism, the people are. So I just want to know what your opinion is on the concept of nationalism and how it relates to the Indian to India. Thank you.
Yeah, nationalism has two different meaning when it comes to the northern hemisphere, and it has a totally different meaning when it comes to the southern hemisphere. For example, southern hemisphere, when I mean the former colonies of Britain or France, the African nationalism is nothing wrong. They got liberty because they identified their nationalism. India got independence because we identified our national identity. So that is understood differently. In Western terminology, in Northern Hemisphere, nationalism, one immediately identifies with the First World War. One of the reasons for the First World War was the rise of nationalism. The Balkan countries and the nationalism in Serbia, Croatia, all these countries have been one of the reasons for the collapse of the Austria-Hungary Empire also, and one of the reasons for the First World War. When you take the Second World War, you see another form of nationalism emerging. In Italy, we have seen the rise of fascism under the leadership of Mussolini, which was part of the nationalistic ambition or nationalistic identity. And we have seen another form of fascism, which is known as Nazism in Germany, which was also based on a national identity and idea of national hegemony. And this nationalism is very different from the desire of independence and the nationalism connected with that we understand from the Southern Hemisphere. So nationalism is good for some countries if it is understood in the term of liberty from a colony, for the authority of their colony. That is a collective fight for freedom, for its liberty. On the other side, nationalism as a force of separation from other people or against cosmopolitanism or against a universal world, that is a different thing. So that is growing in many parts of Europe, but not very big. Generally, the nationalists or the far right in Europe is very, very small, under something like 8% or 7%, sometimes 2-3%. But they're very vocal, making a lot of sounds. Neo-Nazis are there. Neo-fascist groups are there. The right-wing, or in America, for example, the Christian right, they behave something like the Nazi groups. So these kind of national identity beyond, which asks for a hegemony of the cultural identity or the identity politics that I would like to share with over the other cultures. That is the kind of nationalism that is dangerous. These are two different things. In the way it is understood in the Western world, nationalism is a dangerous thing. It's damaging. It's against the spirit of the world becoming one, against the spirit of the borders going away. It's against the spirit of cosmopolitanism. It's against people coming and moving and migration, and it's against all foreigners coming and even exchange of people from one country to the other. It's all against that. That's bad. That's wrong. That's against the spirit of the new world. But the nationalism that unites people together, what is uniting Indian people together with all subnationalities? That's the Indian nationalism. What's the spirit that in Pakistan people are united? That's a kind of nationalism based on Islamic homeland. So these are nationalisms which has a different meaning. So, one cannot compare these two nationalisms together. It's two different things. And nationalism as it is understood as for example, if one particular religion thinks that they have hegemony over the other religion, or one culture thinks that they have hegemony on other culture, that's the same kind of dangerous nationalism coming up. But if it's a uniting factor of a nation, it's not that dangerous. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanal. Amal, I think you have not the questions. Lemario, please.
Thank you, Madhu. Good evening, Sanal. For simplicity, my question is basically from what's next perspective. Let's construct a bipolar scenario, right? Wherein we have US, right, Europe and their potential alliance on one side, and China, Russia, and their potential alliance on the other side, right? So my question is basically, does the US side have any long-term a grand strategy to counter the expansionist ambitions of their adversaries, right? So, like what we have seen is like recently we had a G7 and they were trying to come up with some kind of infrastructure project to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. Right? That was like a long-term plan. But currently, what we are seeing is like there are economic sanctions put, right? You mentioned about Russia being removed from SWIFT and all that, right? And there is another potential possibility is like NATO, right, getting expanded, right? All potential, all the countries which have a potential threat, right? They would try to join the NATO, right? So this immediate, maybe from a long-term, strategy perspective, do you think there is a grand strategy to counter the expansionist ambitions?
I think I understand the question. Every single country in the world, or every single individual, every single cultural group would always think to counter the expansion of its enemy, if one can use the word enemy, or its competitor, or what it considers wrong or bad, or what it goes against its own interest. Right. If Pakistan expands its hegemony, it expands its striking power, India will be concerned, naturally. And every single country, United States is seriously concerned if it loses its strategic interest in some places. So when there is a change coming, which affects our strategic interest, you would make counter positions. How do you make counter positions? In modern world, there are different ways to handle it. If you remember, historically, the classical role, which was played by the unifier of Germany, Bismarck, how did he handle the situation? So when he finds an enemy coming and expanding its interest, he would make a potential allies on the other side. He would make a new agreement. That's where diplomacy works. When you see your, for example, your enemy is expanding its terrains or its hold of interest. I can take a classical example of South Asia. Now, Pakistan has an additional area of its control or its interest in Afghanistan. The present-day Afghanistan rule, the Taliban rule, is supported by the extremist forces in Pakistan. So by collapsing the government of Afghanistan, Pakistan got an additional expansion. So India considers Pakistan's interest adverse to India's interest. How would India handle it? There are two ways of handling it. Should India go and attack Pakistan? That's not the solution in the modern world. India should find new allies to counter it. It should make new agreements to counter it. What shall be the striking power additionally that they have gained by this process, and how that can be countered by strategic measures by making new allies? That's how things have to be solved in the modern world. Earlier times, there was only one solution. Go and strike and beat, either get killed or kill. That was the only solution earlier. That is how empires worked. And in that process, great cultures perished. If you remember the two great cities, Rome and Carthage. Where is Carthage now? Carthage no more existing. The Romans have gone and butchered the whole people in one whole night, and Carthage has gone into oblivion in history. That's not a solution in the modern world. In the modern world, we have to find strategic solutions. That's why diplomacy is working. And when there is a supposed enemy expanding its terrain or influence, and one has to find other ways to counter it. If they attain more weapons, what one do is, we would make an alliance or attain more weapons. If they have more missiles, we would find ways to get counter anti-missile weaponry. That's how it has to be handled. Not to be, not to go and take control of the country. That was at the time of Roman Empire, we could think such things. That is the mistake of Putin. For example, if he found that the fear of this Ukraine, that Russia could attack it, he had two ways. He could have promised that, well, we don't have any kind of military plans. We don't attack other countries. We are believing in peaceful coexistence. That's what he tried to sell. Many times he said that we don't attack. We don't have aggression. He repeatedly said he lied to the world all the time. So that's one way. We don't have any plans for that. But he should find what is that make them afraid of Russia and how to end that fear. That is how politics should work. Instead, he decided to go and capture it, and he thought that he has power economic connections and other powers, and therefore other nations would be silent. He thought he would get a walkover. That was a wrong idea. So this is a permanent political issue. Always a perceived enemy expanding its control is a permanent issue of conflict everywhere. To resolve it with diplomatic measures and countermeasures without going into a direct conflict is what the new world order, I don't mean with the classical term, the new world, order of diplomacy or negotiations should work. That is how things should be resolved, not by getting into a fight always. Then we would never find, a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamari. Ajish.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sanal. Thank you, Madhu, for inviting me over. I want to have a two precise questions for Mr. Sanal. That's one is basically what I see from today, the German parliament, I think so you also privy to those information. What is the impact on the whole Europe on Germany increasing the budgetary allocation from $53 billion to $100 billion and taking the defense spending to 2% of GDP? And just to add on, the German has never taken any of these kind of decision in the last 40, 50 years. Even with the enormous US compulsion of increasing the funding for NATO. But suddenly within 2-3 days, such a major shift coming from Germany, do you believe that the USA has succeeded in their diplomacy? And second thing, I just want to add it, given that the whole Western Bloc is coming along, India being abstinence in the United Nations, are we on the wrong side of the world history? Thank you.
Yeah. That's very good questions. See, the German increase of military, spending limit now has gone to, almost double now. That's 2% of GDP. That's a very, very big amount. And, this kind of an increase, if you said 50 years, not 50 years, from the end of Second World War, from 1945, which means 55 plus, from last something like 77 years, this was the biggest allocation for military spending by Germany. So that's a huge increase. And what prompted them to do that? In fact, the Second World War, two countries were totally demilitarized practically, Germany and Japan. Japan did not have an army for a long time, or a token army only. And Germany now getting more weapons, and they're getting almost more than double money for buying weapons or producing weapons, is something against the spirit of the end of the Second World War, actually. What would America want? Would America want Germany to be a big stockpile of weapons again? Before this, like before the Second World War? Can it cause big dangers? That can be a good question. But that becomes imminent now because of the new situation with Putin. Putin has created that situation. Because of Putin's attack on Ukraine, there is a serious fear in the whole of Europe about the security and safety. Every country is increasing its budget on military buying. Well, who would benefit it? It may not be America. Where would Germany buy weapons from? That's not decided. There are big competitors. That can be from France. That can be from Sweden. Well, even that can be from China. It can be from anywhere. You can buy weapons from anywhere. But certainly not from Russia. So Russia lost the market. If this was not the reason and they were increasing their military budget, Russia would have been a potential marketplace. So they lost the market practically. But in fact, Russia was the reason for increasing this budget. That's number one. Number two, I would always believe that the money spent on military should be curtailed down. USA and USSR earlier, and now the present Russia and China should cut down their military expenditure, and we should not spend money on buying weapons and destroying this whole world so many times. How many times you can destroy this world? With this present weaponry, you can do it something like 2,000 times you can destroy the whole earth. Why should you have all these weapons? And one should find diplomatic solutions and other practical solutions, and there should be a perfect global order and agreement that people are not breaching and countries are not breaching, and it should go like that. That should be the spirit of the growing world. But given the situation that there are conflicts, this will happen, and this is a dangerous situation. America would try to win the German market, of course, and Germany would, of course, try to get the hegemony over the whole European Union. Germany is the richest country in European Union. that one has to imagine. And Germany and France are the richest country in European Union. But European Union's headquarters is in none of these countries, but in Hague. That's the beauty of European Union. And the presiding person of European Union is coming on rotation. It comes to small countries also. So European Union is not a kind of a mighty power-centered structure. It has a different structure. Many people call it bureaucratic in its structure, but I would say that that's a beautiful structure of respecting each country. And I mean, its pattern is very, very different. I am a great fan of the idea of European Union. Now, coming to the military budget increase, is that a success to American interest? I do not know exactly, but if they buy only from America, it's good for America because they're producing a lot of weapons. I mean, not the government, but private people, but the government is getting a lot of tax out of that. And I mean, they would be benefiting out of it. So that is, anyway, I mean, buying weapons is a huge market, which is still growing. And one of the biggest producer now is United States, but the next big producer is China. China is also a big producer. China can be a market. I mean, a kind of a shop to sell all this weaponry. Now, coming to the question, what China would take or India would take in this conflict. We have taken India and China abstained in the UN voting, as you all know. And I would say that that was a strategic move only. They didn't want to antagonize Russia because anyway, one knows that, I mean, this is not going to be passed. Russia would veto it. They have veto power and no resolution can be passed without Russia approving it. I mean, even if any country of the 5 superpowers, if they veto it, you cannot pass it. So it's anyway not going to pass, but they didn't vote again in support of it, but they abstained because they think of a world after this conflict also. This conflict is not the end of the world. So the post-conflict period also is something, these two countries, two potential big powers that are emerging for the next decades. Both of them would see seriously the importance of Russia. And they would also see, in my opinion, the post-Putin period. Putin is not going to live forever. There'll be a new government, there'll be a new system, there'll be a new pattern coming after Putin also. What would be the post-Putin scenario? All the countries would think in long terms. That also would be in their consideration. So I would say that this would not mean anything being neutral. They are on the wrong side. I think nobody has taken it that we have taken a wrong side. We would have been in the wrong side if we voted the other way around. No. Still, for example, India got an opportunity now to take an initiative to take the negotiations going on. China has an interest. Of course, China has an interest. And many people would consider China and Russia are natural allies. Not always, not necessarily. Because China and Russia has interests in Europe. China would not lose its grip on Europe. China has two ways of money. One is American work coming there. From Apple to all these software companies producing in China, because people are working in 2 shifts, 12 hours. In America, you cannot work for 12 hours. You will work only for 7 hours. But in China, you can get workers for 12 hours, workers' country. Cheap production you can achieve from China. And if China is not there, America will go to North Korea to produce or Vietnam to produce, because it's easy for producing things when labor laws are not in actual use. Where in European Union and America, labor laws are in effect. But in so-called communist parties, which are workers' parties ruling countries, the labor laws are not really up to the mark like Europe or America. That's an irony. I mean, that's a real irony, but that's reality. So China would not jeopardize its connections or links with European Union. That's what I was telling. Many people thought that European Union, being capitalist in the classical Marxian terms, would go for the interest of capital and would not secede its interest in Russia, was Putin's calculation, because he comes from the classical, school of the Bolsheviks. So he would think like that, but he did not go. Rather, it has gone on matters of principle. China, on the other side, would go on the classical capital interest, because China has real capital interest, because it has lent money all over Europe. It has invested money all over Europe. It has invested money in the rest of the world. And if there is a sanction coming on China, their ambitions about economy's growth will collapse. They would not risk that. China has to lose a lot, because economy standing is based on its investment in Europe and Africa and Asia. And if sanctions are coming, done, that's gone. So Soviet Union never wanted China, when it was Soviet Union, to come above Soviet Union's interest or position. There's a conflict of hegemony always. So Russia, with the change of authorities and change of political ideologies, the spirit of hegemony is there in Russia. I don't think Russia would want China to grow above them. They want to gain back the lost glory. That's one of the other interests that Putin has, to show his own people. I brought back the lost glory of the Tsars and the Soviet Union. So I don't think they are potential friends. In fact, there are inner conflicts which are much more important than the potential possibility of an alliance.
Thank you. Just to add on, what will be the scenario from the weapon expenditure coming out of Japan, given the way the Russian Federation is acting now under the leadership of Mr. Putin? And second thing, what will be the Chinese about the opportunity they can have on Taiwan specifically at this point of time? That's my last question. Thank you, sir.
I think, with what we have seen now, China would play it safe when it comes to Europe or America, because that's the market and that's where the jobs are coming. So they would not play very big risk there. They have no economic interest in Russia. You have to understand that. China gets no work from Russia, and China does not sell anything in Russia. They sell in Europe and America, and they get work from Europe and America. So China has no economic link than the old ideological link that they had during the time of the Bolsheviks. So there is nothing that connects them except from the wish of China to come top on the economy. So this is something Soviet Union never liked, and the present day Russia would not like also. So therefore, that is not an issue really coming up that many people would wish. But coming to Japan, that's an interesting question. Japan does not have huge budget for military arsenal even now. They didn't have, any kind of air force for a long time. So the spirit in Japan is for pacifism. I've been in Japan, by the way, by a coincidence, in my early career, I worked in Japan for 1 year for Afro-Asian Rural Development Organization. And I've been in Tokyo and Aomori for a long time. And I know the general spirit of Japan at that time. I have close friends in Japan also. Japanese mindset is that they dislike America even now because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's number one. Number two, they want to come to the top of the world, which has been taken over. In fact, what Japan was coming up with their technology and their production has been taken over by China. The Japanese economy is not affected because they produce cars, for example. Why the Japanese economy is not affected with the growth of China is when they produce their Suzuki cars, they sell more than 50% of the cars in Japan. Toyota is sold more cars in Japan itself than it sells to the whole world. So Japan has its own market because it's a very powerful and vibrant economy. And the economy is never going down. They're keeping off from all these conflicts and concentrating on their good life. So Japan is not going to spend more money on buying weapons. It doesn't have any real big conflicting country. And they would keep off from all these wars, is what I think.
Thank you, Sanal.
Thank you.
Shall we wind up now?
Yeah, the conversation is having a very good information, great information. Thank you very much, Sanal. And also thank you, Ajesh. Now it is time for winding up, right, sir?
Yeah, I'm very pleased that we have more than 1,000 people altogether participating in the clubhouse now, and altogether. And it's because in Malayalam meetings, I have sometimes 4,000 or 5,000 people attending, but this is something I've been fascinated, and it was a new experience. Thank you very much for this wonderful response.
I want to share something interesting. Earlier today, I took a stand as, but the CPM followers know they have made a new stamp.
Oh.
New stamp. No, they can't call me Sangi because Sangi is also supporting Russia. These people are also supporting Russia, so they decided to make a new stamp to stamp us.
I think when we see things, we don't think what others will see, and others will, because of political commitments, because of ideological positions, people want to take positions without thinking. But let us not be influenced by any of those, and we have to see things without any prejudice, openly. And every position that we take is verifiable and questionable, and we should be able to correct also if we make mistakes in our judgment. We should be open, fair, sincere, and try to correct as much as possible.
I would just end it by saying nothing is worth risking a war, and much less a nuclear war. Someone must find the courage to push back this momentum towards war and lead the way towards cooperation and disarmament. Thank you, Sanal sir, for patiently educating us with the history and politics revolving around this situation. And we all stand for the innocent, and hopefully there is peace. Thank you, Madhu, for helping through the clubhouse, and thank you everyone for joining. See you next week.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madhu, Shubhi, and all other people who were cooperating in running this meeting and participating in this meeting. And wonderful questions were coming. And I'm very happy that we all are thinking seriously and thinking in the right direction. Thank you very much.